Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Kathleen Lorek. Kathleen Lorek was born on August 9, 1953, in New Mexico, USA, into a large and loving family. She had two sisters, Loretta and Serena, as well as three brothers, William, Leo, and Joseph. In the 1970s, her family relocated to California. It was there that Kathleen met Jeffrey Line, and their relationship quickly blossomed. At the age of 23, Kathleen married Jeffrey, and shortly afterward, they welcomed their first child, Mike. Over the following years, they had two more children, Eric, born in December 1980, and Marissa, born in August 1983. However, as their family grew, Kathleen and Jeffrey's relationship began to deteriorate. After 20 years of marriage, they divorced in 1997. The divorce was challenging, but Kathleen was granted primary custody of the children. While Jeffrey retained visitation rights and was required to pay child support, Kathleen focused on rebuilding her life. During this difficult time, she regained her zest for life. She became more social, remained in California, and as her children grew up and moved out, she fully embraced her independence. Around this period, Kathleen secured a position as an assistant to the general director at a tech company. Her career is progressing steadily, and she seems to be heading toward a promising future. During her time at work, Kathleen met Johannes Lorek, the son of one of her colleagues and a native of Austria. They quickly bonded and began dating. Despite the challenges posed by Johannes frequently traveling back to Austria, the two maximized their time together. Whether enjoying romantic dinners or taking trips to the mountains, they made efforts to strengthen their relationship. In early 2003, during one of their trips to the Swiss Alps, Johannes proposed to Kathleen. However, there was a significant challenge. Johannes planned to move back to Austria permanently. Kathleen accepted his proposal and appeared ready to join him in Europe. They were married in the United States, but Kathleen still had many ongoing projects to complete before she could reunite with Johannes and begin their life together in Austria. Kathleen worked as an executive assistant to the company director, a role she performed with dedication and reliability. She was highly regarded by management and colleagues alike for her professionalism. The company was located near the Contra Costa Canal Trail, a popular spot in the Concord area where locals often jogged or biked. Kathleen frequently took walks along the trail during her lunch break. She kept a pair of sneakers at work just for these walks, and whether she went alone or with a colleague, it became part of her daily routine. Many of her colleagues also enjoyed using the trail during breaks. During her lunch break, which typically lasted about an hour, Kathleen not only had time to eat and rest but also to speak with her husband, Johannes. They often called each other multiple times a day, eagerly anticipating the moment they could reunite. 2 months after their wedding, during a normal workday, Kathleen left for her usual lunch break. On Tuesday, May 13, 2003, at 12:40 p.m., she decided to take a walk along the nearby trail to get some fresh air and talk to Johannes. Co-workers saw Kathleen leave the office and head toward the canal. Typically, this path would be populated with joggers, casual cyclists, or dog walkers, since it was midday and the area was fairly busy. Strangely, however, on that day, the path seemed unusually quiet. In the distance, Kathleen noticed a few figures moving farther away. As she walked along the road, she passed a few people, but at that time, nothing suspicious. After all, she was on the phone with Johannes, who was an excellent companion for conversation. Kathleen and Johannes were calmly discussing their future plans when suddenly Johannes heard an alarming noise, a scream, followed by a thud, and then the call abruptly disconnected. He immediately tried to call his wife back but was sent to voicemail. Unable to reach Kathleen, he contacted her workplace. By the time he reached her colleagues, they were already concerned because she hadn't returned from her usual walk. Kathleen's prolonged absence was unusual. She maintained a consistent routine, particularly when it came to her lunchtime walks. Known for her reliability, it was entirely out of character for her to leave work without notice. Her co-workers and supervisors were puzzled, while Johannes grew increasingly worried. Efforts to locate her in the office were unsuccessful, prompting them to notify the Concord Police Department around 3 p.m. The police took the matter seriously and immediately began investigating. Within 10 minutes of receiving the call, officers started searching along the route Kathleen was expected to follow. Shortly into their search, they discovered blood on the pavement along with marks resembling bicycle tire tracks. The blood smear extended into nearby bushes. Following the trail, the police found Kathleen's sneaker around 3:30 p.m. Her co-workers identified the bloodied shoe, which lay in a pool of blood. Just a few meters from this spot, in a wooded area, a mutilated body was discovered lying on the ground amidst a horrifying scene. The victim appeared to have been brutally attacked and murdered. The assault was so violent that she could only be identified by her clothing, which was mostly pulled down. Authorities believed the attack was motivated by abuse. Kathleen was still alive at first, though she was in critical condition. She was rushed to the nearest medical center, but medical intervention was unsuccessful. At 4:54 p.m., she was declared dead due to a traumatic brain injury. Her skull had been completely shattered during the attack, leaving her head severely crushed. Kathleen, who was employed by a local company, had been attacked while walking on the trail. Johannes had heard her scream over the phone during the assault. Kathleen suffered severe head trauma caused by a blunt object, and after the initial blow, she was dragged into the nearby bushes. Along the way, she endured further brutal beatings, with fragments of her scalp and hair later found along the trail of blood. The area where the crime took place was concealed from view by a hill, making it easier for the attacker to go unnoticed. But the question remained: who could commit such a barbaric and horrific act against a woman? Police requested backup, and forensic experts meticulously examined the crime scene for evidence. Detectives interviewed Kathleen's colleagues and local residents, while law enforcement appealed to the public through the media, seeking witnesses or crucial information. The city offered a $10,000 reward for tips leading to the criminal's arrest. Early in the investigation, only a few reports surfaced, none of which provided useful information. A thorough search of the path and the bushes where Kathleen had been dragged also failed to uncover any new clues. The murderer appeared experienced in committing violent crimes, leaving no trace behind. An autopsy revealed the extent of the brutality Kathleen had suffered. She was severely beaten over an extended period and was also abused. Detectives confirmed that it was an unprovoked act, a conclusion that was corroborated by Johannes. The attack was spontaneous, leaving Kathleen with no chance to defend herself. She sustained no defensive injuries, as she likely lost consciousness after the first blow to her head. Investigators began exploring possible theories about the killer. One theory suggested that the culprit could have been a maniac acting in a state of extreme emotional disturbance, given the excessive cruelty of the crime. Another theory considered a personal connection between Kathleen and the perpetrator, yet who could harbor such hatred toward a kind and gentle woman like her? Johannes, her husband, was unable to provide any meaningful leads. Although the assault took place while Kathleen was talking to him on the phone, he did not hear any names or clues that could reveal the attacker's identity. It appeared Kathleen was struck immediately, causing her phone to be knocked out of her hand, fall to the ground, and shut off. Within an hour of searching, the forensic scientist discovered what appeared to be the murder weapon, a metal rod, torn from a fence made of thick, concreted steel bars. It seemed likely the attacker had discarded it near the crime scene. A bloodied fragment of the rod lay just a few meters away from Kathleen's body. The investigation revealed that she had been struck multiple times with the rod, causing fatal skull fractures. Even if she had survived, the injuries would have left her permanently paralyzed. Friends and family were unable to suggest anyone who might have had a motive to harm Kathleen. With no clear leads, detectives focused on her immediate social circle. They discovered that she had a calm and non-aggressive personality, consistently avoiding anything unlawful or confrontational. Her life was generally peaceful, except for one tumultuous period, her divorce in 1987 from her first husband, Jeffrey Line. Known to be a particularly bitter process, the divorce raised suspicions about Jeffrey. Detectives speculated that Jeffrey might have harbored lingering resentment toward Kathleen, which could have intensified upon learning of her recent wedding. This potential surge of anger might have led him to act impulsively. However, the investigation stalled, leaving the crime unsolved. When the crime scene was eventually reopened, unease persisted in the area. Local residents avoided the spot, fearing another violent incident, and employees of nearby businesses stopped visiting, concerned about encountering a possible predator. Kathleen's second husband, Johannes, was quickly cleared as a suspect. His alibi was solid, confirmed by a verified mobile phone call that placed him far from the crime scene at the time. Investigators also interviewed Jeffrey, the ex-husband, who also had an ironclad alibi. They explored the possibility that either man could have hired someone to commit the crime. However, this line of inquiry led nowhere and seemed unlikely from the outset. Within hours of contacting the police, both men were removed from the list of suspects. As investigators scrutinized the area surrounding Kathleen's body, they discovered something significant was missing: her phone. If she had been on a call during the attack, where was her phone? Detectives suspected the killer might have taken it. Tracing the phone's signal led them to a residential complex just a 5-minute drive from the forest where the body was found. Police quickly obtained a search warrant for the entire building. During the search, officers encountered Juan Sanchez, a 20-year-old resident, who reluctantly admitted that he had Kathleen's phone. At first, it seemed he might be involved in the crime. However, Juan denied any wrongdoing, explaining that he had found the phone earlier that day while riding his bike. On his way back from the store, he came across a phone abandoned near the blood trail that detectives had discovered earlier. Juan led authorities to the location where he had found it, approximately 50 meters from the trail. The authorities found Juan's account plausible but opted to verify it through DNA testing. Kathleen had been abused, and biological samples collected from her body allowed investigators to create a DNA profile of the attacker. However, the case predated advanced DNA analysis techniques, and the process took significant time. Once the attacker's profile was developed, it was compared to entries in the DNA database, which, at the time, contained only around 6 million samples, a relatively limited number. Unfortunately, no match was found. Juan's DNA did not correspond to the crime scene evidence, leaving the investigation at a dead end. As police struggled to make progress in their investigation, fear and confusion grew in the local community. Residents felt unsafe knowing someone capable of such a brutal attack, a broad daylight assault with a steel rod, was still free. Investigators speculated that someone in Kathleen's social circle might have been infatuated with her, harboring jealousy or anger over her marriage. This theory became the primary focus of the investigation during that period. According to one of Kathleen's colleagues, shortly before she met Johannes, she had a brief relationship with a young German man. A friend stated that Kathleen was supposed to meet him just a few days before the attack. It seemed that she was feeling uncertain, so she wanted to clarify things by explaining that she was married and wanted him to end any hope of pursuing a relationship with her. Though a deeper relationship was clearly impossible, she was willing to meet him once, as he seemed to have good intentions. However, some individuals do not handle rejection well, which can sometimes lead to dangerous behavior. The investigators began looking into this clue, but they could not confirm any meetings or communications between Kathleen and the German man. When Johannes entered her life, this connection was severed entirely. From interviews with people who were in the area on the day of the incident, the detectives uncovered something noteworthy. Shortly before Kathleen was attacked, a suspicious man was seen in the vicinity. According to witnesses, his behavior was odd. One passerby mentioned that he had tried to lure Kathleen into the bushes under the pretense of showing her something, while another person described the man fishing in a nearby pond. These witnesses worked with a sketch artist, resulting in 2 separate portraits based on their descriptions. Although the witnesses had not communicated with each other, the sketches displayed striking similarities, which boosted the police's confidence that they now had a visual of the suspect. The reward for information leading to the capture of the criminal has been increased by $25,000, bringing the total to $35,000. This reward is offered by the company where Kathleen used to work. As expected, this generated a flood of unrelated tips, many of which were ultimately unrelated to the case. A press conference was held, during which Mike, Kathleen's eldest child, made an emotional public appeal asking for help to find his mother's killer. Authorities also released sketches of the suspected perpetrator. Simultaneously, detectives compared the sketches to a database of known criminals with histories of abuse or violence. Based on the psychological profile, they believed the suspect was an experienced offender with a history of violent behavior, likely including incidents involving bloodshed. Their investigation eventually led them to identify John Kaler as a match to the released sketch. Trained dogs were brought in and followed his scent to his home, but the trail ended near a highway just a few kilometers away. 3 days after the attack, on May 16, 2003, the police arrived at John's residence. To their surprise, it wasn't John who answered the door but a frightened and frail woman. She introduced herself as his sister, Elizabeth, and stated that the officers had arrived too late. She explained that on May 14th, after the press circulated images of the suspect following a press conference, John went to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco and ended his life. Detectives concluded this was no coincidence and believed John had ended his life due to the enormity of committing one of the most senseless and violent crimes in recent history. The police obtained warrants to search John's residence, and the findings confirmed their suspicions. Among the evidence were bloody clothes matching witness descriptions of the man seen on the day of the attack on Kathleen. They also found newspaper clippings about the crime, a behavior often associated with murderers. Additionally, they discovered a cutout likeness of the police sketch, created based on witness accounts, which closely resembled John. John's prior offenses were relatively minor compared to the heinous crime he was now suspected of committing, leaving everyone shocked that he could be responsible for such an atrocity. Authorities believed his mental health struggles may have contributed to his dangerous tendencies. However, John's parents strongly disagreed. His father criticized law enforcement, accusing them of unfairly linking his son's mental health condition to the horrific crime. He saw this as an insult to his son's memory and a way to unjustly defame a man already suffering from an illness. The police required John's DNA to confirm or refute the evidence against him. Witnesses who assisted in creating the composite sketch were shown photographs of John, and all of them identified him as the same suspicious individual seen on the walking path. As the news spread, media outlets and newspapers picked up the story, fueling public speculation. John's father passionately defended his son's innocence, prompting authorities to hold a press conference where they admitted that their suspicions might be unfounded until the DNA results were finalized. This reignited public concern about the potential threat posed by an unidentified criminal. When authorities reviewed John's history, they discovered he had been arrested 4 times for drunk driving over the past decade. Additionally, in 1987, he had threatened to kill a judge's mother, which led the judge to believe there could be no mistake in identifying him as the suspect. However, the DNA test results were shocking. John was not responsible for Kathleen's murder and assault. The revelation profoundly shocked the public, especially after John had faced severe backlash due to the media's portrayal of him as guilty based on suspicion alone. His family demanded an apology, arguing that the damage inflicted on John's reputation ultimately drove him to end his life. The publication of portraits resembling him further contributed to his devastation. John's father advocated for legal reforms to protect the families of suspects when there is insufficient evidence. Tragically, despite their efforts, their family inadvertently fell victim to the fallout from the investigation. Kathleen's loved ones, trying to help solve the case, donated $5,000 to a reward fund for information leading to the perpetrator's capture. This brought the total reward to $40,000, but it did little to advance the investigation. Detectives worked diligently, collecting DNA samples from at least 5 different men, but none provided breakthroughs. Approximately 4 months after the murder, a witness who had previously spoken to investigators returned to the station with new information. He described encountering a suspicious man with a bicycle near the canal shortly before the attack. The man was standing in an unusual location, looking around nervously, and appeared alarmed upon noticing the witness. The two briefly spoke, smoked a cigarette together, and then parted ways. Hoping this encounter might yield evidence, the police asked the witness to identify the location. Remarkably, they discovered the cigarette, but the men had smoked among others in the area. DNA testing on the filter confirmed a match, providing a critical lead in the case. The witness met with the police again and shared detailed information about the suspicious cyclist. While he did not know the man's identity, he learned during their conversation that the individual worked at a telemarketing company in Walnut Creek, located about 15 minutes from the walking trail. Since there was only one telemarketing company in the area, the police visited its offices. With witness-provided sketches and some assumptions, detectives reviewed photographs of all the employees. Colleagues quickly identified one employee, 38-year-old Robert Ward Frazier, who bore an uncanny resemblance to John Kaler, so much so that the two might have been mistaken for brothers. Suspiciously, Robert had stopped coming to work shortly after the murder. Detectives tracked down his last known residence and visited his apartment, but their efforts led to another dead end. Robert's ex-wife disclosed that he had left a few weeks earlier. While she did not know his current location, she provided his toothbrush, which allowed investigators to collect DNA for comparison with evidence from the crime scene. The case stalled once again, pending DNA analysis. Then, unexpectedly, the police received a tip from a sheriff's office in Indiana, where Robert had been arrested for an unrelated offense. He had attempted to return to his hometown but was wanted in another state for violating probation conditions before moving to California. Authorities questioned Robert, who admitted to living near the area where Kathleen was murdered. However, he vehemently denied any involvement in the crime. Originally, Robert denied having any involvement in the case. However, DNA test results confirmed a match to the crime scene evidence. When confronted, he claimed that he had walked along the path while intoxicated, needed to relieve himself, and may have accidentally left DNA traces on Kathleen's body while urinating. However, this explanation did not account for how his bodily fluids ended up inside her. Even when faced with incontrovertible evidence, Robert continued to fabricate lies. The DNA results clearly implicated him, which led to his arrest on charges of abuse and first-degree murder. The severity of the case meant that John faced the possibility of receiving the death penalty or, at the very least, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In May 2006, Robert went to court, showing no emotion and refusing to admit to his crimes. His defense team scrambled to find ways to lessen his sentence, while the prosecution relied on the uncompromising evidence of the case. Simply recounting the horrifying details, a crime driven by cruel lust, was enough to shock the jury. The trial lasted an entire month, despite the strength of the prosecution's arguments. Ultimately, Robert Ward Frazier was found guilty on all charges. In a final effort to reduce the sentence, the defense attorneys emphasized his troubled early years. They explained that he grew up with parents who had substance abuse problems, which resulted in significant hardships. Robert endured immense psychological pressure as well as abuse, experiences that the lawyers claimed had shaped him into the person he had become. However, the prosecutor countered that a traumatic childhood does not justify committing violent acts. The jury ultimately concluded that Robert Ward Frazier deserved the death penalty. Upon hearing the verdict, he displayed emotion for the first time during the trial, accusing everyone of being biased against him. He is currently on death row, awaiting the execution of his sentence, all while continuing to proclaim his innocence. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Jorge Torres. Is there anything more horrific than a father murdering his own child? In the investigation and trial of crimes, mistakes in identifying the culprit can have dire consequences. One of the most heartbreaking situations is when an innocent person is wrongfully punished while the real culprit continues to be at large. This was on Mother's Day, when 8-year-old Laura Hobbs and her best friend, 9-year-old Crystal Tobias, decided to go for a short bike ride. They were expected to return within an hour, but vanished without a trace. Family members spent nearly the entire night looking for them. In the early morning, Laura's father, Jerry Hobbs, found her bike while climbing the hill, but Laura was still missing. The search for she and her friend continued. A couple of hours later, a few hundred meters from the bike, Jerry discovers suspicious figures lying motionless on the ground in the dim light of early morning. He quickly realized something was wrong. When they reached the scene, he discovered the bodies of Laura and her best friend Crystal, who had multiple stab wounds. It was clear that their deaths were brutal and prolonged. Sadly, this tragedy happened close to their home. Both girls lived in the small town of Xene, Illinois, which has a population of 20,000. Their deaths deeply affected the local community, sparking a desire among residents to uncover the truth and the cruel criminal responsible. However, it's difficult to uncover the full story. The police came under intense public pressure. So, they worked hard to gather any information that could help them inform the community and capture the perpetrator. A few days after the tragedy, the commander of the task force at the Lake County Major Crimes Department confirmed that has a suspect. Detectives had already spoken with Jerry. They think he is involved in the case. He was brought in for questioning on the day the bodies were discovered. The police noted that Jerry had been acting strangely. A background check revealed that he had been released from a Texas prison just a month prior. Overall, he had a significant history of legal troubles. Although Jerry had repaired his relationship with his daughter, could he handle the situation involving her and her friend? The girls were discovered lying next to each other, having been raped. The scene was horrific. Both had suffered multiple stab wounds and had been beaten. A forensic expert identified a total of 31 cuts from a blade, primarily on the upper body, chest, and neck. The injuries were similar for both girls. Laura had defensive wounds, suggesting she fought back in desperation. There was reason to believe that the killer intentionally caused maximum pain to his victims, targeting areas that would prolong suffering rather than lead to immediate death. Jerry firmly denied any wrongdoing. Consequently, he was questioned for hours by law enforcement officers who sought to piece together the events leading to the deaths of the two victims. After a lengthy interrogation, the detectives managed to obtain a confession, which was captured on video. Jerry said he and his wife Sheila returned home on Sunday around 3 o'clock. At that time, their 4 children were flying kites by the lake. Their daughter Laura asked her parents if she could go for a bike ride with a friend, mentioning that it was Mother's Day and she wanted to celebrate it with a festive ride. Even though Laura was still under house arrest for taking $40 from Jerry, Sheila chose to let her go. Jerry disagreed with Sheila, believing that Laura should complete her punishment to understand her mistake. However, Sheila convinced him, and Jerry decided not to interfere, he wanting to ensure that both Laura and Sheila had a nice Mother's Day. Laura was allowed to go for a walk and was expected to return in an hour. However, she did not come back on time. Initially, her parents thought she and her friends had lost track of time while enjoying themselves and would return soon. But as evening approached and Laura still hadn't arrived home, their concern grew. The path through the park was short, and it usually took about 20 minutes to walk. Given that she had been gone for several hours, her absence became increasingly worrying. Jerry decided to investigate. He planned to search for his daughter along the path and intended to discipline her for disobeying, so he set off down a dirt road. Jerry encountered Laura and Crystal, who were playing and ignoring their parents' requests. Upset, Jerry insisted it was time for his daughter to go home and said he would punish her. He wanted to take Laura home and told Crystal to go back as well since her parents were waiting for her. However, neither girl was willing to leave on their own. Jerry then turned to Laura and said they were leaving because she was too caught up in her play. Laura reacted by getting upset, and Jerry grabbed her hand. She resisted and screamed to be let go. Crystal also pleaded with him to release her friend and leave them alone. Both girls started to be disrespectful and rude to Jerry. When Jerry refused to let go of Laura's hand, Crystal pulled out a small switchblade and insisted that he release her. In a moment of confusion, Laura bit her father's hand, which made him angry. He struck her in the face, causing her to fall to the ground. Crystal then lunged at him, but he easily took the knife away from her. Once he had control, he hit Crystal in the face, and she also fell. Furious, Crystal stood up and attacked Jerry, but he responded by stabbing her in the chest several times. Afterward, he approached Laura, who was desperately trying to defend herself, but she was no match for him. He struck her in the face again, and then stabbed her multiple times with the knife. Jerry's statements were collected after 24 hours of interrogation. The police believed they had caught the real criminal. He detailed the brutal aspects of the attack, information only the perpetrator would know. Despite his confession, it was hard to accept that a father could harm his own daughter and her friend so viciously. The detectives were particularly suspicious due to Jerry's criminal history. Born in 1970, Jerry Hobbs dropped out of school after 8th grade. He was known for his hot temper, which often led him into trouble. His criminal career began soon after school, with significant offenses occurring in 1990, when he first served several months in a Texas state prison. After that point, he was released but then re-imprisoned, typically for petty offenses. The list of criminal activities included possession of illegal substances and multiple assaults on individuals for theft. There were serious underlying issues that contributed to these crimes. In August 2001, Jerry attacked his wife while they were living in a trailer. The situation escalated into physical violence. 3 neighbors attempted to intervene, but Jerry, in a fit of rage, grabbed a chainsaw and chased them around the trailer park. He only stopped when one of the men struck him in the back with a shovel, causing him to fall and become incapacitated. By that time, the police had been called, and they arrived shortly after to take control of the situation. In December 2002, he was convicted and received a suspended sentence. However, he failed to report to his probation officer, leading to the revocation of his probation. In October 2003, he was sent to prison, where he served 18 months. He was finally released in April 2005. After his release, he took a bus to Zane. He visited Sheila's parents' house, where he reunited with Sheila and their 4 children. Laura and her 2 brothers were from Jerry's relationship with Sheila, while her eldest child was from her previous marriage. Jerry put aside past grievances and hoped to rebuild their relationship and live together as a family again. Jerry spent a lot of time reflecting over the past year and a half, dreaming of starting a new life. Despite the challenges in their relationship, Sheila genuinely loved Jerry, and they decided to give their relationship another chance. Unfortunately, their efforts were in vain. Just a month after they reunited, a tragic incident occurred. One day began positively, with children riding bicycles and roller skates along the forest path. Many families were having barbecues, making the area lively and seemingly safe. There had never been any incidents in the past, and parents often allowed their children to explore on their own. It was puzzling that no one seemed to have heard anything. There were no witnesses to the double murder. After Jerry confessed, the police arrested him, and he was held in custody without bail for over 2 years while the prosecution prepared for trial. During the investigation, several strange inconsistencies came to light. Investigative agency found it hard to believe that the 8- and 9-year-old girls had a knife and attacked him, prompting him to fight back and ultimately kill them in a moment of anger. Additionally, it was odd that the girls refused to go home after their father found them walking alone in the dark. Were the schoolgirls really not afraid to be outside at that hour? All of this seemed absurd. In his confession, Jerry did not mention anything about rape, even though the girls had experienced sexual violence at the crime scene. Forensic evidence later uncovered more details about the terrible events that occurred that day. Scientists found male DNA samples, but these did not match Jerry. Instead, they belonged to an unidentified man. Despite this evidence, investigators proposed their own explanation. However, they did not explain how male DNA could be found on the girls, making their reasoning seem even more questionable. The charges indicate that it was a serious case. They had Jerry's confession and his criminal background, so winning in court seemed like a formality. Details about the DNA evidence were not revealed. The video recordings of the interrogations were sufficient to persuade the jury. As a result, Laura's father was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2009, a significant change occurred in Arlington, Virginia. Amanda Snell, a 20-year-old servicewoman, lived there. On July 13, 2009, she failed to report for her shift at Fort Myer, raising concerns among her supervisors. Amanda was typically responsible and committed to her career, so not showing up for duty without notice was out of character for her. To check on her well-being, management sent several colleagues to her dormitory. They knocked on her door, rang the doorbell, and attempted to reach her by phone, but received no response. When they found her door unlocked, they entered the room. The first alarming sign was that her wallet and ID were untouched. The military quickly discovered blood and signs of a robbery in the bedroom. Amanda's body was found in the closet. She had been severely beaten, and a cord from a household appliance was still tied around her neck, with a pillowcase over her head. Investigators determined that she had died about 2 days before her body was discovered. Numerous pieces of evidence were collected from the crime scene, including a sample of the pillowcase. The police noted that her laptop, phone, and bed sheets were missing, and they found several footprints in the room, suggesting that another person had been present. Since the base was secured against outsiders, this indicated that the perpetrator likely lived or worked there. Forensic experts identified the shoe prints as Nike Air Force One, which were very popular on the base at the time, providing no leads for the police in their search for the suspect. Months went by. On February 27, 2010, another attack occurred just 5 kilometers from Amanda's workplace in Arlington. In the early hours of the morning, 2 female postgraduate students were returning from dinner when a man confronted them at the entrance of their building. He threatened them with a weapon, forced them inside, and followed them with his gun drawn. He bound their hands with electrical cords and ordered one of them to get into his car. He then drove her to a remote area outside the city, where he raped her. The attacker strangled her until she lost consciousness and left her to die in a wooded area covered in snow, not considering that she might survive the assault. The girl regained her senses and made her way to the nearest road, where a motorist found her and offered help. He stopped and called emergency services. The student, suffering from hypothermia, was taken to the hospital. Meanwhile, her friend had also contacted the authorities. Fortunately, they did not find any immediate danger. After being discharged, she spoke with the police and provided valuable information to the investigators. The most significant breakthrough was her detailed description of the attacker and his car. She described him as a short, smooth-skinned Hispanic man who drove a silver car. Detectives quickly recognized that the handwriting matched that of the criminal who attacked Amanda. Additionally, the police had obtained DNA from the person who attempted to take the girl's life. That her miraculous rescue would set off a series of events that would significantly impact many lives. Later that evening, officers collected a DNA sample from Amanda's. In the car described by the girl, they discovered the university ID of the kidnapped girl along with her earring, which helped establish a connection between the main suspect and the attack. The main suspect has since been taken into custody while awaiting trial. Several months went by as the police worked to understand the details of these disturbing events. Eventually, the DNA sample was analyzed and matched with the National Criminal Database. Law enforcement officials were taken aback by an unexpected discovery. The DNA found on the bodies of Laura and Crystal, who were murdered in 2005 in Zane, matched that of this suspect. At the time of the girls' murders, the suspect, Jorge Torres, was just 16 years old and lived in Zane. The police were further shocked to find out that he was a friend of Crystal's older brother. This investigation into the brutal attack revealed a shocking miscarriage of justice. Jerry, the father of Laura, was wrongfully imprisoned for a crime he did not commit. After spending many years in prison, Jerry began to show significant changes in his behavior. 2 weeks after DNA evidence linked Jorge to the crime, police identified the true killer of the 2 schoolgirls. The charges against Jerry were dropped, and he was released from prison in early August 2010. After the murders of the schoolgirls, Jorge was not apprehended and graduated from high school in 2006. Just a few months later, he enlisted in the Marines. The investigation revealed that he had boasted about being part of the Marines, an important unit of the U.S. Armed Forces. But this did not help his criminal image. He remained a ruthless monster and continued his violent actions. Now, it was necessary to examine his potential involvement in other attacks. When in prison, Jorge was still scheming and manipulating events. But the manipulative tactics Jorge used could no longer be hidden. Alongside the DNA testing, additional evidence was necessary to prove his involvement in the murder of the schoolgirls. To gather this evidence, authorities decided to recruit informants from among the prisoners in exchange for reduced sentences. A suitable informant was chosen. He was a former restaurant owner convicted of financial crimes and had no prior violent crime record. He willingly agreed to cooperate with the police. During a week in August 2010, he was approached to communicate with Jorge. This person said, in his confession, Jorge stated that he entered Amanda's apartment in the early morning with the intention of robbing and assaulting her. When Amanda woke up and saw him, he took advantage of her shock, tying her hands with a wire and wrapping a cord around her neck because he feared she would recognize him and report him to the police. Jorge claimed that she had no time to fight back. He coldly detailed how he assaulted Amanda while she was suffering, and then concealed her body in a closet to delay its discovery. The informant reported that Jorge spoke about his actions with a sense of pride, almost bragging, making law enforcement officers were shocked. Jorge's behavior indicated possible psychopathic traits, as individuals with such disorders often seek admiration. Following this confession, the police chose to reopen Amanda's case. They discovered that Jorge was a colleague of Amanda and lived directly across the hall from her. In his room, officers found a gun and a computer containing numerous graphic videos of the rape and torture of women. Additionally, Jorge was wearing Nike Air Force One sneakers that matched the shoe prints at the scene of Amanda's murder. Forensic scientists started re-examining samples from the pillowcase found on Amanda's head and from the bedsheet. DNA testing eventually revealed a match, adding one more victim to the list of crimes linked to this dangerous criminal. Although detectives believed he might be involved in other similar offenses, they found no evidence to support this. The police were left with a serious threat to society who had been free for years. It was finally time to pursue justice. The trial of the case in which the graduate student victim survived the attack began in December 2010. The defendant was found guilty of several charges, including kidnapping, rape, and attempted first-degree murder, and was sentenced to life in prison. This was just the beginning of multiple trials. The trial for the murder of Amanda Snell began in 2014, after prosecutors presented Jorge's recorded confession and DNA evidence. The jury unanimously supported the prosecution. In late May of that year, the judge sentenced Jorge to death. In mid-November, he was extradited to Lake County, Illinois, to face trial for the murders of Laura and Crystal. Although the attacker had already been sentenced to death, the state attorney believed it was essential to conduct hearings to honor the victims and their families. The trial started in mid-September 2018. Jorge opted for a plea deal, giving up his right to a trial, and admitting to the intentional murders of 2 schoolgirls. He received a 50-year prison sentence for each murder, but his life sentence was already revoked. He returned to a Virginia prison to await the death penalty while his appeals were under review. The death penalty was abolished in the state in 2021, so Jorge is now serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. One key question remains: why would the biological father of one of the murdered schoolgirls take the blame for this terrible crime? In 2005, Jerry briefly explained his reasoning to his mother, stating that he had been broken by the police during interrogation. Later, after his release, he shared more details with journalists. He revealed that he had not slept for over a day and was actively searching for his daughter with Crystal's father when he learned of her death. Overwhelmed by shock, he was confused and in pain, and the police exploited this vulnerability during the lengthy interrogation to extract his shocking confession. Human rights activists claim that Jerry faced constant pressure from law enforcement, who used various tactics to force him into a confession. As a result of their actions, Jerry lost 5 years of his life in prison. After these events, the man decided to seek compensation for moral damages because he now knows that the police deliberately ignored the most valuable evidence that confirmed his innocence and locked him up instead of looking for the real killer. DNA samples obtained after the rape clearly showed that Jerry was not involved in the crime, yet law enforcement chose not to pursue the real culprit and continued to charge him. Now, it took multiple crimes being committed for the truth to finally come to light and for an innocent man to be set free. During the recent press conference regarding this incident, the state attorney addressed the media. He made efforts to downplay the situation and stressed that no one obstructed the detainees' access to legal counsel. He claimed that the detainees' rights were fully respected during questioning. According to him, Jerry's own behavior raised suspicions, and his past criminal record further damaged his credibility, leading the police to suspect his involvement in the girls' deaths. Detectives believed he had knowledge relevant to the case and continued to press him for answers, but Jerry maintained that this was merely an unfortunate coincidence. A few hours into the interrogation, the police took away Jerry's clothes, claiming they needed to analyze them. Instead, they gave him a thin suit that left him cold. They repeatedly showed him disturbing photographs from the murder scene and intimidated him with threats. Although Jerry consistently refused to confess, the police began threatening to arrest Sheila, suggesting that their children would be left without parents. He couldn't let that happen. To obtain a confession that could be used in court, they needed to record it on video. There was supposed to be no coercion or aggression from the officers, but many takes were necessary because Jerry initially refused to read the confession prepared by the investigator. Ultimately, the threats led him to comply with the detectives' demands. In February 2014, the civil lawsuit of a wrongfully convicted man was resolved, resulting in an award of over $6 million. However, he does not view this as a true victory. He emphasizes the importance of the wrongful conviction, which led to reforms in Lake County's law enforcement system. He notes that while he was imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit, the actual killer continued to rape and murder other victims. Fortunately, that killer is now in prison and can no longer harm anyone. Police believe he is a serial killer, and it's likely that there were additional victims. An investigation into other cases of forced confessions revealed that 4 more innocent men were also wrongfully convicted. DNA evidence cleared them, but this crucial information was ignored by the Lake County prosecutor at the time. These 4 men spent a total of 75 years in prison and are now free. The case of Jorge Torres serves as a stark reminder of the devastating impact of violent crime and the long road to justice for victims and their families. Jorge's crimes, which include the brutal murders of Laura Hobbs and Crystal Tobias in 2005, as well as the subsequent murder of Amanda Snell in 2009, went unsolved for years, leaving a trail of pain and confusion in their wake. His eventual conviction, made possible by DNA evidence, not only exonerated Jerry Hobbs, who was wrongfully imprisoned for the murders of the two young girls, but also revealed the extent of Jorge's crimes. The case underscores the vital role that forensic science plays in ensuring justice and preventing wrongful convictions, and serves as a stark reminder of the necessity of thorough investigations in the pursuit of the truth. Thanks to the persistence of law enforcement and the power of DNA testing, justice was finally served, although the damage done to the lives and spirits of those affected remains irreparable. Hello, crime enthusiasts! Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Benno Neumayer. In today's story, we focus on the Neumayer family, who live in Balna, a city in northern Italy. The family consists of parents Peter Neumayer and Laura Perselli. Their son Benno is 30 years old, and their daughter Maid is 27 years old. Benno is a doctor who has completed his university education and is dedicated to fitness. His father, Peter, is 63 years old, and his mother, Laura, is 68 years old, both retired from teaching at school. Despite their age, they are still active in social and cultural activities. The family is respected in the community. On January 4, 2021, Laura and Peter suddenly disappeared. They were last seen that morning when they went to the supermarket. Laura was planning to visit her mother, who had just returned home from the hospital. Laura rode her bike to her mother's house. A few hours later, Laura's sister sent her a short video of their sick mother, but Laura never opened the message. At the same time, Laura's daughter Maid was on vacation with a friend outside the city and sent her mother a photo but received no response. Benno called his mother at 8:30 that evening, but she did not answer. 3 minutes later, he sent a voice message to his girlfriend, Martina, expressing his concern that he had not been able to reach his parents. He told her that he would be at her house in about an hour or two for dinner as planned, and that he would be late. Benno asked her to call him back later on a regular phone line instead of WhatsApp because he did not have an internet connection. Martina called him back shortly afterwards, and they arranged to meet at 10:12 p.m. When Benno arrived at her house in his father's car, he said he had forgotten to shower. He went to wash his face and asked Martina if she could do his laundry. She didn't ask any questions and agreed to help. Benno gave Martina a bag full of dirty clothes. She didn't check the contents and threw them in the washing machine. The couple then had a great evening at the bar and a passionate night at her house. Benno didn't leave his girlfriend's house until 5:30 a.m. When he was with her at around 11 p.m., he sent his mother a short text message wishing her a good night. He noticed that she hadn't read it, but he was too busy that evening to think about it. Early in the morning of January 5, Laura's sister came to her house. She knocked on the door and rang the bell, but there was no response. It was clear that no one was home. Laura's sister was worried and called Benno to ask about Laura and Peter. However, Benno said he was not home and did not know where they were. Laura's sister was busy taking care of her sick mother and could not leave her alone, so she asked Benno to try to find them. Benno promised to help and suggested that their parents might have gone to the mountains, as they often did. He advised them to wait a few days. Meanwhile, Laura's daughter, Maid, was at the resort with her friend and boyfriend. She noticed that her messages had been ignored, which made her suspicious. She called her dad and was surprised when he didn't answer. His social media pages also showed unread messages, and she couldn't reach her parents, which made her even more worried. So Maid called her brother Benno, who said he was walking his dog in the mountains a few kilometers away from their parents' house, and he couldn't check on them. He seemed worried throughout the call, and his story sounded strange. The dog was very old and sick, barely moving even in their yard, so it was hard to believe he could hike several kilometers into the mountains with the dog. Unable to get more information from Benno, Maid decided to ask a neighbor who lived next door to her parents for help around 1:30 p.m. The neighbor was home, so she agreed to check on her parents. The neighbor knocked on the door, and Benno opened it. At that time, the neighbor was still on the phone with Maid. She immediately recognized her brother's voice and was surprised that he had just refused her request to check on her parents. Benno explained that he had rushed back to his parents' house after walking the dog and was now home. Benno said that their parents were not home and insisted that he did not know where they had gone. Maid called all the hospitals in the city because she had a strong feeling that something was wrong with her parents. Eventually, Maid stopped her outing and returned home. She asked Benno if he knew what had happened to their parents, but he said he did not know. He explained that he had spent the previous day with his girlfriend and had only returned home in the morning when their parents were no longer there. Feeling desperate, Maid decided to contact the police to report her parents missing. At this point, Benno began to discourage her from calling the police. He seemed to be stalling for time, but he suggested another approach that he thought would be more effective. So he contacted a friend who was a police officer for advice on how to handle the situation. Benno's friend suggested contacting a search and rescue service that specialized in mountain rescue, but that didn't help either. In the end, May decided to go to the police himself, regardless of whether Benno supported her decision or not. He eventually agreed, and they went to the police station together. The young man told them about his parents' disappearance and suggested that they might have gone into the mountains. He mentioned that an avalanche had occurred in the area they frequented, about a day after they left. He believed that his mother and father might have been buried under the snow. This explanation seemed plausible to the police and became the main focus of the investigation. Laura and Peter were declared missing, and search teams were deployed to the site of the avalanche. Trained dogs were used to search. Despite a thorough search, it took a long time to cover the entire area. The police decided to interview Benno to gather more information. They noticed that he was evasive and increasingly uncomfortable when asked difficult questions, making his behavior seem suspicious. After leaving the office, Benno suddenly displayed a sudden and inexplicable aggression. He attributed this outburst to hunger, fatigue, and stress. The next day, there was still no news from the police about Peter and Laura, prompting Maid to return to the station. Benno tried to stop her again, insisting that the police needed more time to conduct the search. During this time, another girl named Jasmine contacted Benno. It turned out he was chatting with 3 other people on Tinder, and he was particularly interested in Jasmine, and he showed little interest in the ongoing investigation. On January 6, Maid returned to the police station. It had been 2 days since her parents had gone missing. Laura and Peter had not contacted her, which made her believe that something had happened to her parents. They usually informed her before they went into the mountains and would prepare carefully for such trips. She felt the need to conduct a more thorough search of the area near their home. The police were actively involved from the beginning. Initially, they focused on the possibility that the couple had gone missing in the mountains. During this time, Benno went to the supermarket with his new girlfriend, Jasmine, where he bought a large amount of hydrogen peroxide, explaining that he needed it to prepare to sell his father's car. Search teams along with volunteers were organized to search the areas outside the mountains and around Laura. Despite the large resources and the participation of about 600 people in the search effort, Peter and Laura were still missing. Everyone worked together in the hope of finding them quickly. Finally, Maid expressed her concerns. She thought about Benno's strange behavior and the fact that their parents had disappeared shortly after she left the city for a short time. During that time, Benno was supposed to be with them, and their relationship was complicated. She suspected that he might know more than he was letting on. The police decided to question Benno again. This time, during questioning, he was overly friendly, which was surprising given his violent reaction after his previous encounter with the police. The officers suspected that he was deliberately controlling his demeanor to avoid revealing any important information. During this time, suspicions grew that Peter and Laura were likely dead, and it was believed that the couple's son, Benno, might be involved. Benno became the prime suspect. Maid regularly contacted the police, sharing information about Benno and their parents. Benno's behavior was often so rude and aggressive that Laura was afraid to be home alone with him. On January 7, the police tracked Benno down. That day, Jasmine and Benno got into the family car and went to a hardware store where they bought rags, cleaning supplies, a bucket, and hydrogen peroxide. While Benno asked Jasmine to pay for the items, they stopped at a car wash before heading home. The police arrested them there and found all the items they had purchased in the trunk of the car. The car was impounded for further investigation. The police also attempted to confiscate Benno's jacket, but he refused to hand it over. Benno was questioned again that day. Ultimately, he did not provide any useful information, and since there was no evidence against him, he was released. Although the police confiscated the cleaning kit, Benno and Jasmine decided to clean the house. Benno asked her to wear the jacket the police had asked to confiscate. She did not suspect anything and agreed. After a short while, he took the jacket off Jasmine and put it away. Later that day, the police arrested Jasmine, thinking she might be involved in the case. They questioned her for hours about Peter and Laura's disappearance, but could not find any evidence to link her to the crime. Jasmine is later confronted by the Carabinieri police several times during interrogation, including when Benno's jacket is confiscated. Her hair and skin particles are found on the jacket, forcing her to prove her innocence. She explains that she helped Benno clean the house and wore the jacket, but she was unaware of the implications and risk of harm to herself. On January 17, Maid returns to her parents' house and finds Benno there. She decides to voice her suspicions, which leads to an altercation between them. Maid suggests that Benno may be involved in Peter and Laura's disappearance. He becomes hysterical, shaking as he tries to convince her that she is mistaken. He eventually swears that he had nothing to do with it. Despite his assurances, she remains suspicious of Benno, knowing he is a good liar. Benno tries to justify his actions. However, Maid knew about his troubled relationship with their parents and his aggressive nature. He was the only one capable of causing harm to their loved ones. On January 18, Benno was the prime suspect in the case. The police suspected that he had killed his parents and then hidden their bodies. But the police lacked solid evidence. They only found a small blood stain on the car, not enough to confirm the death of his parents. However, the investigation continued. Important information came to light when Benno's phone was confiscated and examined. Geolocation data from the phone was examined on the evening when Peter and Laura went missing. The data showed that Benno had left the city and stopped near the bridge on the Adige River, where he stayed for a considerable amount of time. The police believed that he may have dumped their bodies there. This location became the focus of the search for evidence. On February 6, 2021, a search operation was launched in the Adige River. Police quickly located Laura's body. However, her husband, Peter, had been missing for more than 3 months. He was finally found on April 27, after Laura's body was discovered on the riverbank. A brown stain that looked like blood was found on the bridge over the river. Forensic experts analyzed the sample and confirmed that it was Peter's blood. Surveillance camera footage captured Benno's car on the evening of the incident as he returned from the bridge to his ex-girlfriend Martina's house, confirming that he was at the scene where the bodies were found. Peter's body was found by forensic experts in relatively good condition. A layer of algae had formed on it, slowing down decomposition, and the cold temperature helped preserve the tissues. This made it easy to spot signs of strangulation on both Peter and his wife. Marks on their necks indicated that they had been attacked from behind. The cause of death was confirmed to be strangulation, and it was determined that they had been thrown into the river after they were dead, as there was no water in their lungs. Given Benno's strong and muscular physique, he was able to overpower his elderly parents without much difficulty. After his parents' bodies were found, Benno admitted that he was involved in their deaths. On the night of the incident, he had an argument with Peter. Benno tried to avoid the argument by locking himself in his room, but his father barged in and continued the argument. In a fit of rage, Benno attacked his father with a rope and strangled him. When Laura heard the noise and went upstairs, he feared that she would call the police, so he strangled her as well. Although his confession seemed credible, his motives seemed too weak to justify such a brutal act. Benno explained that his relationship with his parents had become increasingly strained in the months leading up to the incident. Marked by frequent arguments after he moved back in with them, Benno had begun paying rent at his father's request. However, due to the constant arguments, his father decided that it would be best if Benno moved out. He began to encourage his son to rent his own apartment, but Benno refused. To pressure him to move, his father increased the rent to €700, which Benno considered excessive and unfair. That evening, Peter called him a loser for spending too much time on the computer and forced him to walk the dog. Another argument broke out. This conflict escalated into a tragic situation. Benno claims that his father was the first to confront him, trying to kick him out of the house. As a result, Benno felt he had no choice but to defend himself. The investigation revealed that immediately after the murder, Benno began to create an alibi. He called his mother's cell phone, pretending to go looking for her. After the murder, he asked Martina to wash his clothes to erase any evidence. Although she handed the washed clothes over to the police, no incriminating marks were found on them. Police believe that his efforts to conceal the evidence indicate a deliberate act. Not only did Benno understand what he was doing, but he also tried to avoid consequences for this brutal crime. Benno attempted to explain his actions by claiming that he was mentally disturbed and affected by the attack. However, his calm demeanor and careful efforts to conceal evidence of the crime showed that he was fully aware of his actions. After his arrest, psychiatrists evaluated him and determined that he had a personality disorder characterized by narcissism and social problems. He had recently had frequent sudden outbursts of anger, which doctors attributed to his steroid use. Benno began taking additional medication. This led to a significant deterioration in his mental state due to hormonal changes, leading to increased aggression and a complete loss of self-control. Maid said that he would often attack her when angry and was often violent with other family members. On one occasion, she suffered multiple bruises as a result of his aggression. Even as a child, Benno tried to strangle her, but their parents were present at the time. In 2020, Benno entered a relationship with a girl named Nadine, and they moved to Germany together. A friend noted that at first, Benno was very attentive and caring. However, over time, his behavior became controlling, showing signs of selfishness and abusive tendencies. He tried to create distance between Nadine and her family, isolating her from her parents and friends, leaving her to spend most of her time alone. Things got worse when in June 2020, Nadine discovered that Benno had used her credit card without permission and stolen money from her account. This betrayal prompted Nadine to end the relationship. She called Benno's parents and insisted that they pick up their son from her apartment. His parents had to drive to pick him up. Just a day after their return, Benno made amends with Nadine, promising to pay her back and asking her parents to let him go home to Nadine. While Nadine was at work, he sent her a selfie showing him covered in blood. Benno claimed he had gotten into a fight with a friend named Dean. However, Dean was in another part of town at the time and did not see Benno. Benno sent some of the photos to his mother, Laura, who was concerned. She contacted a friend for advice. The friend suggested that Benno could be dangerous and advised Laura not to go to his apartment alone. Laura suspected that Benno's mental health had deteriorated due to his use of anabolic steroids. Benno was eventually taken away, and it was discovered that he had been self-harming due to hallucinations. After this incident, Nadine decided not to see him again, but he was discharged after only 3 days. During his stay, doctors did not have enough time to carry out all the necessary tests to diagnose his condition. It was suspected that Benno was schizophrenic, and his family insisted on further testing, but he refused and began taking medication for schizophrenia. By the time Benno's trial began, he had been diagnosed with acute polymorphic psychotic disorder rather than schizophrenia. This misdiagnosis meant that he was taking the wrong medication, which likely worsened his mental condition. While on steroids, he was taking a dangerous cocktail of drugs that affected his behavior. Immediately before the murder, Benno was released from the psychiatric hospital and returned home. During this time, his mother became extremely concerned for his safety. She hid all the knives in the house and locked the doors at night. She believed that as long as she did not provoke him, everything would be fine, so she tried to avoid arguments and limit her interactions with him. Unfortunately, this did not protect her from a tragic end. On November 19, 2022, Benno Numer was sentenced to life in prison. However, his lawyer quickly appealed the decision, arguing that Benno was insane due to a combination of negative factors that worsened his mental condition. To support the defense's claims, several independent medical assessments were conducted, which found him mentally stable. The prosecution pointed out that Benno acted deliberately, as he tried to create an alibi and conceal his actions. Just minutes after the murder, he called his girlfriend, pretending to be worried about his parents' absence. He ruthlessly deceived those around him, sending messages to his deceased mother, deceiving his sister and neighbors, all to escape justice. After the retrial, Benno's life sentence was upheld and remains in effect. The murders of Peter and Laura received considerable media attention in Italy and caused widespread public fear. Hey detectives, welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Russell Rusty and Rebecca Becky Porter. Russell Rusty and his wife, Rebecca Becky Porter, bought a farm in Willard, Missouri, USA, in 1957. At the time, it was a small settlement with a close-knit community where everyone knew one another. The crime rate was low, and life was peaceful, quiet. On April 19, 2011, Rebecca, aged 40, unexpectedly missed her scheduled shift at work. She hadn't mentioned any health issues beforehand, which raised concern among her coworkers and later her supervisors. That morning, the family's neighbor stepped out onto the porch and noticed Rebecca's car still parked outside. Rebecca typically left for work early, as she usually woke up at around 7:30 and left the house by 8 a.m. thinking she might be feeling unwell. The neighbor decided to check on her. However, when he knocked on the door, there was no answer. At first, he assumed she might be resting due to fatigue and didn't think much of it. But as the day went on and the house remained silent, his concern began to grow. Later, Rebecca's daughter, Jessica, arrived at the house, concerned because she hadn't been able to reach her mother by phone. The neighbor informed Jessica about the unusual situation. Together, they knocked on the door, but still, no one answered. When they peered through a window, they saw the house in disarray, leading them to contact the police. Their call followed an earlier one placed by Rebecca's son, who had already reached out to law enforcement after being unable to contact his mother. He expressed his concern and requested a welfare check for the Porter family. When the patrol arrived at the house, they were immediately hit by a strong smell of cleaning products, noticeable even from the porch. The officers inspected the property and peered through the windows. Inside, they found the house in total disarray, particularly in the kitchen and the main bedroom. In the bedroom, the bed was out of order, the mattress tilted, the blanket pulled off, and belongings like a handbag and a mobile phone scattered across the floor. There were clear signs of a struggle, which made the house resemble a crime scene. In the kitchen, they discovered a cut window screen, suggesting it might have been used as the entry point for a burglary. The situation seemed to point to a break-in. However, upon entering the house, the officers uncovered something that didn't support the burglary theory. Surprisingly, many valuable items were untouched despite the chaotic state. Rebecca and Russell were nowhere to be found, fueling suspicions of foul play. The police's findings prompted them to seal off the area and launch an investigation into possible kidnappings. When Rebecca's son arrived at the farm, he assisted the police by providing helpful insights. What deeply concerned him was the presence of his stepfather's medication, which was still at the house. Russell, his stepfather, relied on these pills every day after medical treatment, and Russell would never leave them behind if he left the house. Rebecca's wallet, which she always carried with her, was found in the marital bedroom. Her car remained parked outside the house, and inside the car were her bank cards, with the key left in the ignition. This raised serious concerns, as it was clear something alarming had occurred. Although the house had a strong smell of cleaning products, only one bottle of bleach was found, and it was still full. No empty containers of cleaning products were discovered, yet it was evident they had been used very recently. This seemed suspicious. Someone had likely discarded them after use. It appeared the perpetrator had quickly poured bleach over various areas in an attempt to erase evidence, with pools of bleach still visible in some spots. The police found a computer monitor under the table, but the rest of the system was missing. It appeared to have been disassembled, as some wires were still present. Upon investigation, the police discovered that this computer managed multiple cameras located both inside and outside the house. The theft of the system unit meant all the stored data had also been taken. It was clear the perpetrator had stolen the evidence to prevent it from falling into the detectives' hands. Additionally, it was determined that all the cameras were connected to a single security system. The system had sent out an alarm prior to the incident, but no response was received. Investigators noted the unusually large number of CCTV cameras, which covered the entire property without any blind spots. Such extensive security measures in a quiet, safe neighborhood raised suspicions. Many assumed the system was installed to comfort Rebecca, whose nerves and fearfulness had grown with age. However, the situation was concerning since they lived in an area where residents were familiar with one another and serious crimes had not occurred in years. The police theorized that they might have felt threatened or frightened by someone, possibly an enemy, who acted against them. The stolen cleaning products indicated that the criminal might have been trying to erase evidence of blood, leading investigators to fear the worst. However, Rebecca and Russell's children rejected this idea. They argued their parents had no enemies, were peaceful by nature, and rarely engaged in conflicts, let alone provoke someone to commit a crime. The neighbors were also shocked by the news. The Porters were viewed as deeply religious and upstanding people, attending church every Sunday and frequently participating in neighborhood events. They seemed friendly to everyone. However, people who knew the family better informed police about Russell's troubled past. Before meeting Rebecca, he had struggled with alcohol and substance addiction, which raised the possibility of him relapsing into old habits, accruing debts, or associating with dangerous individuals. However, there were no recent signs of such behavior. Rebecca made great efforts to help Russell overcome his problems and prevent relapse. Many neighbors heard these speculations, and rumors began spreading. Some even believed a Mexican cartel might have been involved in Rebecca and Russell's disappearance. Meanwhile, the police explored different possibilities, such as one spouse harming the other and fleeing, or both voluntarily ending their lives together. Bloodstains were discovered in the house despite attempts to clean, reinforcing the police's theory of a violent crime. However, even by the third day of the investigation, there were no concrete leads or evidence. Rebecca and Russell were officially declared missing, and the search efforts intensified. Authorities suspected at least one person had been harmed in the house. Suspicion grew as both spouses had left behind essential personal belongings they used daily, suggesting they might both be victims. Neighbors and friends were left wondering and trying to figure out what had happened to Rebecca and Russell. Everyone was bewildered by their sudden and inexplicable disappearance. As more time passed without any sign of them, anxiety grew among family members and local residents. Disturbing rumors spread throughout the community, creating fear among the public. Approximately 5,000 flyers featuring pictures of Rebecca and Russell were printed. Family members and volunteers distributed them widely, placing them at gas stations, grocery stores, truck stops, and other areas frequented by locals. The local cycling community has joined in a search effort, assisting by interviewing residents for clues to Rebecca and Russell's whereabouts. A reward has been offered, and detectives have been working closely with relatives and friends of the family to gather information about the surroundings, identify possible suspects, such as the kidnapper or killer. They also investigated any recent or past conflicts the Porters might have had with other people. Through this, it was revealed that a family member, Robert Campbell, had been involved in a dispute with Russell. Robert, who drove a pickup truck, lived near the Russells and became the primary suspect in their disappearance. Detectives begin investigating his life and relationships, uncovering a long-standing conflict between him and the Russell family. Their disputes often escalated into heated arguments, and about 3 weeks before Rebecca and Russell vanished, the tension reached a breaking point. Both parties obtained restraining orders against each other. Naturally, detectives approached Robert at his home to question him about the incident leading up to Rebecca and Russell's disappearance. It was revealed that Robert had been claiming ownership of the family farm, even though he had no legal rights to it. Previously, Robert had lived on the property until new owners, Russell, who inherited the farm from his grandfather, and his wife Rebecca, moved in. Robert was upset by this, believing that, as the former owner's son, he was entitled to the property. However, he had been excluded from the will due to strained family relationships. Most of the conflict revolved around the farm. Robert proposed splitting the farm with Russell, but Russell refused and presented the ownership documents. This refusal fueled Robert's resentment. Robert believed his claims were valid because, prior to Russell and Rebecca moving in, he had worked on the house. He had renovated the facade, built a second floor, and invested time, money into improving the property. Nevertheless, when Russell took over, they effectively evicted him and dismissed his investments as irrelevant. Rebecca and Russell explained to Robert that, according to the legal documents, he had no rights to the property. His investments did not entitle him to any portion of the farm. Despite this, Robert felt wronged. He demanded that Rebecca and Russell either vacate the property, share ownership, or at least compensate him for his expenses. Unfortunately, they were unable to reach any form of agreement. The situation escalated, and it was clear that no resolution would come from the Supreme Court. This created an opportunity for Robert to remove both Rebecca and Russell, as well as seize their property. Detectives observed that Robert was behaving very possessively toward the property that originally belonged to Russell's grandparents and had not been passed down to him. He held deep resentment toward the family, particularly Rebecca and Russell. Eventually, due to ongoing conflicts, he moved his new trailer about half a kilometer away from the farmhouse. Robert seemed to have a strong motive for violent actions, including an attack, kidnapping, or even murder, given the long-standing disputes with the family. Although Robert denied any involvement in Rebecca and Russell's disappearance, claimed that he had an alibi, the evidence complicated matters. On the day of the incident, he was reportedly 150 kilometers away in another city on a business trip with his wife. Despite this alibi, police appeared to piece together a narrative suggesting his involvement. Robert, who lived only a few hundred meters away from the Russells, openly expressed interest in their property and became subject to a restraining order. The farm's CCTV cameras were likely installed due to concerns about him. Witnesses confirmed frequent arguments between Robert and the family. On one occasion, he was seen driving by their home, yelling out the window that their time there was limited, perceived by some as a threat. It was plausible that Robert could have hired someone to carry out the crime since he had a clear motive and might have wished to avoid direct involvement. But could he really harm his own relatives and their spouse? As investigations dug deeper, it was revealed that Robert harbored significant resentment toward them as recently as a year before their disappearance. Rebecca had previously been married before meeting Russell. Her first husband, Terrence, was a local church pastor. Their divorce was complex and highly controversial. 4 months after the split, Rebecca met Russell. At that time, Russell was battling an addiction to illegal substances and alcohol. However, after meeting Rebecca, she became a positive influence in his life, like a breath of fresh air. From the very beginning, she seemed determined to help him overcome his struggles. Russell later admitted that her presence gave him a renewed sense of purpose. Rebecca was more than 10 years older than Russell, which initially unsettled his family. However, they eventually accepted the relationship. On the other hand, Rebecca's family reacted much more negatively. Following her divorce, Rebecca lived with her children and parents, but they strongly disapproved of Russell. As a result, her children stayed with their grandparents and distanced themselves from their mother, upset by her decision to pursue a relationship with a much younger man who had serious addiction issues. In fact, they refused to attend Rebecca and Russell's wedding. The ongoing discord between Rebecca and Terrence wasn't unusual and didn't initially seem like a strong motive for the attack. However, the intricate divorce process brought up several questions, especially concerning a restaurant they had opened and co-owned during their marriage. Neither of them wanted to split the business during the divorce, which could have provided a financial motive for Terrence to target her and her new husband, Russell. At this stage of the investigation, detectives had not identified any other potential suspects. The focus shifted to two individuals, Uncle Robert Campbell, who had a strained relationship with Russell, and ex-husband Terrence Fraser, who might have financial grievances against Rebecca. Investigators approached Terrence, a church pastor, to learn more about his recent interactions with Rebecca. Unlike Robert, Terrence appears genuinely distressed from the start and seems deeply saddened by Rebecca's disappearance. His behavior stood in stark contrast to Robert's and showed no signs of recent conflict. Terrence had moved on with his life and appeared content, expressing sincere regret over the disagreements during their divorce. He admitted he could have been kinder at times and acknowledged his past mistakes with genuine remorse. The police continued to stay in contact with Rebecca's and Russell's relatives and friends during the investigation. One of Russell's friends shared some intriguing information. The family's property had been targeted by multiple crimes in the past. This suggested they might have had more enemies than anyone had realized. For instance, a few months before the disappearance, there had been an incident of agricultural theft on their farm. In response, Russell had installed video cameras on the property. Robert was also investigated for possible involvement. However, it was confirmed that he couldn't have committed the crime during that time because he was far from the city. Despite this, his intense dislike for Russell raised suspicions that he might have orchestrated the crime. At the time of the incident, Robert was working as a truck driver and was traveling to Texas. Separately, Terrence was also ruled out as a suspect through further checks. This led to the theory that the Porters might have had other, less obvious enemies unknown to the police. Eventually, the investigation appeared to hit a dead end. About a week after Russell and Rebecca disappeared, an unexpected development occurred. Early one morning, the station received a call reporting that Donald and Helen Willingham had been found stabbed to death in their home. The police immediately noticed several similarities between this case and the Porters. Both homes were broken into without warning, nothing of value was stolen, and the level of brutality was extreme. However, unlike the first incident, the bodies in this case were not removed, nor was there an attempt to clean up the crime scene. The reason? A neighbor had frightened the perpetrator. The witness even chased a man wearing a black hoodie for a short while but failed to catch him. The suspect managed to escape, but the neighbor promptly reported the incident to the police around 5 a.m. The investigation into the second case revealed troubling parallels. The Willingham family bore a striking resemblance to the Porters. Both women, Helen and Rebecca, were actively involved in their local church. Helen was married to Donald, the local church pastor, just as Rebecca had once been. This raised fears of a possible serial killer or a connection between the two families. Despite intense efforts by law enforcement, progress in both investigations was limited. The police thoroughly examined the relatives of the Willingham family, their close acquaintances, and the timeline leading up to the crime. As in the case of the Porter family, several suspects were identified, but each was ruled out after further questioning. Both cases appeared to be at a standstill until July 2011, when the situation took a turn. In that month, a man named Jose Huckleberry was taken into custody at the station, accused of committing a burglary in Greene County. During a 7-hour interrogation, he confessed to killing Donald and Helen but denied having any role in the disappearance of Rebecca and Russell. Eventually, investigators confirmed he could not have been responsible for the Porters' disappearance, as he had a solid alibi. Both the cases of the Porter family and the Willingham family exhibit striking similarities and notable differences, particularly regarding the motives and methods of the murderer. As a result, Jose was removed from the list of suspects in the Porters family case. Later, a police informant who had recently been released from prison claimed to possess valuable information regarding the disappearance of Rebecca and Russell. The informant stated that a prisoner named Tony had boasted during a conversation that he took away the birthdays of Rebecca and Russell, a phrase in criminal slang meaning that he killed them. Although the detectives were skeptical of this claim, they decided it was worth continuing to investigate the lead. The police began investigating Tony. They first reviewed the location data from his mobile phone to determine whether he might have been near the Porters family's residence on the night of their disappearance. In parallel, they delved into Tony's background. The inquiry revealed that he had a history of burglary, primarily targeting electronics and household appliances. Notably, his criminal patterns seemed to align with the theft of items from the Porter family's home, including a computer system unit, potentially linking him to the case. At the time of the investigation, Tony was in jail awaiting charges for another burglary. Detectives arranged to speak with him directly, but Tony denied any involvement in Rebecca and Russell's disappearance. The family recounted Tony's tumultuous past, claiming that he had experienced problems from a young age. He had consistently found himself in trouble and had been connected to the criminal world since his school years. Investigators interviewed Tony's family and uncovered a long-standing conflict among the family members. Some relatives hadn't seen Tony for years and were unaware of his circumstances. Others, like his cousin Dusty Hicks, remained in contact and actively cooperated with the investigation. Eventually, Tony revealed he might have information about a crime involving the Porters. He told the police he could lead them to a location where the Porters' bodies might be hidden, an old hut in the forest. Tony led the police to the site. As they neared the hut, a foul odor grew stronger. Once inside, the smell was overwhelming. In the floorboards, they found a hole concealing a grave filled with garbage and human remains. By this time, 3 months had passed since Rebecca and Russell had gone missing, and the condition of the bodies was severely deteriorated. Identification wasn't immediately possible, and forensic examination was necessary to confirm the victims' identities. Experts have confirmed, through dental records and DNA analysis, that the bodies belonged to Rebecca and Russell. The case was reclassified from a disappearance to a double murder. Investigators concluded that they had been attacked in the head at close range with a weapon. They was found wearing pajamas, suggesting they were likely attacked during the night or early morning while sleeping. It's strange when bodies are found deep in the forest, far from their homes. This area is difficult to access, and for a long time, the question arose, how could a stranger know about this place? The truth was later revealed. Tony's cousin, Dusty Hicks, was an accomplice. Dusty disclosed that Tony was part of a gang, which included several of his childhood friends. They often commit crimes, mainly by breaking into houses and stealing to unlawfully benefit from others' property. Until the Porter family's murders, the gang had no history of violent crimes. Dusty revealed that he, Tony, Wendy Friend, Tony's wife, and their son, Philip, were involved in the massacre. Investigators decided to examine their phone records. Suspicious messages were discovered between Tony, Wendy, Philip, and Dusty. On April 18, 2011, they were near the Porters' family house, but their devices were switched off a few hundred meters away from the farm. The suspects confessed during interrogation that a specific customer had offered them $100,000 to carry out a double murder. Tony, the oldest and most experienced among them, influenced Philip and the others to join the criminal plan, driven by the promise of money. According to their statements, they prepared by wrapping their hands in a special adhesive film to avoid leaving fingerprints. Before heading to the Porter's farm, they bought a can of bleach, which they later used to wipe away evidence at the crime scene. To disable the CCTV system, they cut the wires, triggering an alarm. After cutting through a fence, they entered the house through a window. Tony carried a weapon, while the others assisted him. He went into Rebecca and Russell's bedroom, brandished the weapon at them, who had awakened, and instructed the accomplices to restrain them using plastic ties. They were then abducted and taken away in a pickup truck to an isolated forest area. Rebecca and Russell were left near a cabin in the woods, where their bodies were later discovered. Philip, one of the suspects, disclosed that Tony and Dusty led them deeper into the forest. Approximately 10 minutes later, he heard the sound of weapons exploding, followed a few minutes later by another explosion, signaling the deaths of Rebecca and Russell. Their bodies were buried hastily in a makeshift grave. The perpetrators returned to the Porter's family home to clean up the crime scene and stole a computer containing footage from the CCTV cameras to eliminate incriminating evidence. The police focused on the person who ordered the crime, someone willing to pay $100,000 to kill two innocent people. Tony eventually revealed a name, Robert Campbell. It made sense to the investigators, as Robert, Russell's uncle, had more than one motive. He wanted revenge for being evicted, but there was something deeper. Russell and Rebecca knew a terrible secret about him, though the exact details were never revealed. Russell and Rebecca suspected that Robert was involved in illegal activities, specifically selling stolen equipment. They had gathered evidence and were planning to report him to the police. To prevent this, Robert turned to his friend Tony, who organized a group to carry out the murders. The entire gang was eventually arrested. Although Robert denied any involvement, insisting that he hadn't done it, the police dismissed his claims. The prosecutor charged all 5 individuals involved. Tony's friend admitted guilt in 2 counts of first-degree murder and received a life sentence without parole. Dusty Hicks was sentenced to 2 life terms. Wendy Friend also received a life sentence. Philip Friend cooperated with authorities, testifying against the others, which led to a reduced sentence. Robert Campbell went to trial, and despite the evidence being circumstantial, he was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 2 life terms without parole. Even Robert's wife, Carolyn, faced potential prosecution for aiding him in committing perjury, but she ended her life before any charges could be filed. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Nicholas Sweeney. The most terrible cases in the history of forensics are murders that are not motivated by anything at all. Nicholas Sweeney was born 6 weeks premature in a hospital in the large city of Cork, Ireland, in October 1981. After her birth, both the baby and her mother were forced to spend 2 weeks in intensive care, but the doctors managed to save her life and avoid developmental problems associated with prematurity. Despite the accompanying challenges, the birth of a girl became a great joy for her parents. John and his wife, Josephine Sweeney, had wanted to have a child for a long time. However, they were haunted by failures, including 3 miscarriages that followed one after another. Young parents almost despaired, so the birth of their daughter became a real miracle, followed by a bright streak in their lives. 3 years after the birth of their daughter, the family was expecting another addition, a son named Sean. Finally, mother and father felt complete happiness. After all, this is what the ideal family looked like in the imagination of them. Meanwhile, the entire family moved to London due to the development of the parents' business. At that time, Nicola was 1 year old. For the next 15 years, Nicola and her parents regularly visited Ireland at least once a year to meet with loved ones. They continued to live in England because London offered more prospects and better earnings. Most often, they visited her grandparents in Ireland. It was there that Nicola developed a true love for nature. When visiting the countryside, she enjoyed interacting with animals, but most of all, she liked horses. It is not surprising that, against this background, she became a vegetarian. At a slightly older age, she began to work with horses in London. She loved to ride these majestic animals and attended the local church when she started going to primary school. There, she also developed a love for music and art. Nicola became a member of the church choir and participated in Irish dances at the local parish. Nicola was generally very proud of her roots and adored her native country of Ireland. Against this background, she constantly asked her parents to move back with her. However, her father and mother's business was actively developing, so they could not give up their favorite pursuit. Instead of moving back, they put the house in Ireland up for sale. It was a great family home, an almost century-old building located on a hillside overlooking the ocean, surrounded by greenery in a very picturesque area. At first, Nicola was upset, fearing that she would never see this place again. However, circumstances changed, and the parents' business began to gain momentum, providing enough funds for more frequent trips to Ireland. In addition, the mother and father did not want to lose touch with their homeland, so they refused to sell the property. At the age of 16, Nicola, along with her brother and parents, moved back for a while to that very house, which they had managed to save. This was necessary because, during this period, her mother and father had a third child, a boy named Christopher. They wanted to raise the baby in a calmer environment. In 1997, 16-year-old Nicola began attending a school located in the center of Cork. Due to the move, she had to change educational institutions again. However, she fit in well with new groups. A little later, Nicola met Sinead O'Leary, who was very similar to her in many ways, even sharing the story of her parents moving to London. Sinead's mother and father had also decided to return to Ireland. In 1998, just a year after Nicola's family moved back, the teenagers immediately became close. Their similar backgrounds and even appearances facilitated this bond. Both girls had a strong London accent, which made them stand out among the local teenagers. They were also quite shy, but Nicola supported Sinead, who entered this school a year later and faced great difficulties communicating with her peers. The girl did not fit into the team easily, and Nicola understood her struggles. She accepted Sinead as a kindred spirit. Their friendship began when Nicola suggested going to the cinema with a group of her friends during a break. The girls stepped outside to talk and ended up not returning for the rest of the film because they realized their similarities and became best friends. Nicola really valued this relationship. In the pages of her diary, Sinead wrote that Nicola had become a second family where she could behave naturally and be herself. Sinead had a tendency to take everything to heart, while her friend calmed her down. This was especially noticeable during exams. Sinead was very worried, but next to Nicola, she felt calmer, as if she were with an older sister. Nicola evoked strong feelings in many who knew her well. She had an excellent relationship with her brother Sean. The teenagers supported each other, especially when their parents were forced to travel to London for work. Nicola usually stayed behind, as her parents took Christopher with them, believing he was too young to be left in Ireland under the care of teenagers. Most of the time, their mother babysat while working part-time as a waitress at a local cafe in the city's shopping center. Sinead attended another university and was frequently traveling to Dublin. Consequently, the girls began to see each other less often, but they maintained warm relations. Every time the friends were together, they simply talked and enjoyed each other's company, often spending the night and having fun. On the evening of Saturday, April 27, 2002, Sinead visited her friend. It was an ordinary day for them, as the students planned to spend the weekend together, hanging out in the city with friends. When Nicola turned 20 years old, she returned home from her part-time job to prepare for an evening outing to the city center. Her colleagues said goodbye to her that evening, unaware that it would be the last time they would see her alive. Nicola left the cafe at 7 p.m., and her best friend was already waiting for her near the house where she was preparing dinner. They discussed their upcoming exams. Their parents were in London and were not planning to return for another week. As usual, their mother and father had taken their younger brother with them. Sean was still working at the hotel, where he served as an administrator. Before going home, he called his mother and spoke for about 10 minutes, promising to call again later that evening. After 8 p.m., all three of them, Nicola, Sinead, and Sean, were at the family home having dinner. It seemed like an ordinary evening for the young people. Nothing foreshadowed the horrific events that would follow this gathering. Meanwhile, in a pub not far from the family home, three young men were unwinding: Barry Dolan, Cy McCarthy, and Peter Whalen. The latter was well known to law enforcement agencies due to his involvement in criminal activity. Peter was respected by no one, and everyone, friends included, feared his unpredictability. He had a criminal history, having been implicated in a robbery on Christmas Eve 2001. He had crashed a private party without an invitation, was thrown out, and returned to attack several attendees with a glass bottle, injuring a number of people, although fortunately, no one sustained serious injuries. All the victims lived near the Sweeney family, and while Nicola knew them, she did not associate with them. Additionally, their dangerous neighbor skillfully concealed his criminal dealings, so the heroine of the story generally viewed them with indifference. On that April evening, in the pub, the group of young men began to insult others present. Peter behaved threateningly, as if he were trying to provoke a fight. The bartender refused to serve him, hoping the group would leave the establishment. Peter pretended to agree, but it was a ruse. As soon as the bartender turned away, he jumped over the counter and grabbed a heavy ceramic ashtray. He intended to smash it on the bartender's head, but one of the patrons shouted in time. The man managed to dodge a direct blow, and the ashtray barely missed, causing only minor injuries to him. Following this, the police were called. Law enforcement officers checked the group of young people, who were all sober and showed no signs of injury. Peter and his companions were asked to leave. Frustrated, all three headed to Barry's house. However, his mother refused to let Peter and Cy stay overnight. Consequently, Peter decided to walk his girlfriend home. As they walked, she noticed how angry he was. He could barely contain his rage and walked a few steps ahead, fists clenched. Peter escorted his girlfriend home, but he still struggled to manage his anger. He felt humiliated for being thrown out of the bar and was unable to take revenge on the bartender. Additionally, the mother of his friend had refused to let him into the house, which insulted him further. In the end, filled with frustration, Peter headed home. However, he did not plan to stay there for long. Quietly, he took 2 kitchen knives. His mother was worried about why he was late. Peter insisted that he had been attacked at the bar, so he spent a lot of time talking to the police. After that, he silently left the house without telling anyone where he was going. He headed towards Sweeney's house, which was surrounded by a high fence, behind which was a garden. This did not stop Peter. He easily climbed over the fence and found himself in the courtyard. He walked along the driveway and tried to open the front door of the house. However, it was locked. Inside, 2 girls were having dinner. Nicola and Sinead and her friend were planning to go downtown after dinner. They were watching a movie but then decided to start getting ready to meet friends. At the moment when Peter entered the house through the window, all 3 were distractedly discussing their plans for the evening, completely oblivious to the impending danger. Meanwhile, Sean had decided to attend the 40th birthday party of his best friend's mother, which was taking place on the other side of town. He asked a friend for a ride to the event, but he arrived too early. Sean offered his sister and her girlfriend a ride to the center, but they weren't ready yet and refused. Instead, Nicola had already arranged for transport and didn't want to let him down. At 10:30 p.m., before leaving, Sean called his mother again, but she couldn't answer because she was trying to put the capricious Christopher to bed. Because of this, the woman missed the opportunity to hear her daughter's voice for the last time in her life. Sean left, leaving the 2 girls in the house. Sinead and Nicola were sitting on the bed in the bedroom, doing the final touches to their makeup. Nicola was facing the corridor while her friend sat closer to the door, but with her back to her. Unexpectedly, Nicola saw a dark figure appear on the stairs. The uninvited guest was silent, and Nicola couldn't understand who it was. She called out to the dark figure, thinking it was her brother Sean playing an unsuccessful joke, but the shadow didn't answer and began to move slowly toward the open door. When the stranger stepped into the light, Nicola realized it was Peter, her neighbor. He didn't immediately take out the knives but silently attacked Sinead. He delivered the first blow, hitting her several times with his hands and feet. The girl was disoriented and fell to the floor, but the villain continued to beat her before pulling out one of the knives and continuing the assault with a deadly weapon. At this point, she was paralyzed with horror and simply begged Peter to stop. Additionally, he acted quickly, and Nicola barely had time to gather her thoughts to help her friend. But the criminal wasn't done. Sinead suffered more than a dozen knife wounds while lying on the floor, desperately resisting. Peter stood over her, using his weight to prevent the girls from screaming or crying, while the attacker relentlessly struck blow after blow. Finally, distracted from his first victim, he looked at Nicola and took out a second knife, screaming as he rushed at her. At that moment, Nicola regained her senses. She ran in the hope of reaching the phone or getting outside to call for help. In her attempt to escape from the attacker, she received 11 stab wounds. The killer blocked her exit from the room, leaving her with only one escape path through the open window. Nicola, in despair, tried to get out. At that moment, Peter caught up with her, stabbing her in the heart before continuing the attack. Surprisingly, Sinead was still alive despite the severe injuries. She was bleeding and slipping away from the attacker. This horrifying scene unfolded in pitch darkness. Later, the investigation revealed that, upon entering the house, the attacker had turned off all the lights he could until he was finally noticed while going down the stairs. Only the bedroom remained illuminated, covered in blood. The criminal again looked for his other victim but was unable to find her. He ultimately decided that she was already dead. Wandering around the second floor, he made ominous sounds, which Sinead heard and prayed would not be directed toward her. Eventually, the criminal lost interest in his victims and left the house. As soon as she heard this, Sinead mustered her courage and left the locked bathroom. First, she went to Nicola, who was lying next to the window in a pool of blood, having lost consciousness. Sinead was very weak and could barely stand, but she managed to grab her mobile phone to call emergency services, then her father. She knew he would arrive at the house in a few minutes since he lived nearby. Unfortunately, 20-year-old Nicola died from her wounds in the arms of her friend just a couple of minutes later. Sinead's father arrived immediately and supported his daughter while trying to provide first aid to both of them. Despite the efforts of the first responders, Nicola lost consciousness due to her injuries. Meanwhile, in the Sweeney house, police and medical teams were working hard. Peter returned to his home to see the result of his actions. Noticing the police and ambulance, he thought both girls were dead. After that, Peter ran to his uncle and pretended to be one of the concerned neighbors gathering near the house. Peter approached with the others and saw Sinead being carried out on a stretcher. Sinead was badly injured but alive. She gave a detailed description of her attacker, and the police interrogated her, fearing she could lose consciousness again or even die. This all happened around midnight. A patrolman recognized Peter, as he matched the description provided by the survivor. When the policeman approached him and voiced his suspicions, Peter immediately became aggressive, threatening the officer, claiming he was dangerous. It was decided to detain him for questioning at the station. According to Irish law, detectives are not allowed to deny a suspect sleep, so Peter Whalen had the opportunity to rest and also contemplate what had happened until morning. This gave him precious time to try to formulate a justification for his actions, but he failed to come up with a plausible lie. Eventually, he confessed to the attack, claiming that he was driven by voices in his head, blaming his actions on a long-standing mental illness. However, forensic experts were surprised to find nothing unusual in Peter's blood. There were no traces of alcohol or banned substance, which was confirmed by toxicological tests. Additionally, there were no documented cases of mental illness in his history, and he was not registered with any relevant clinic. Experts concluded that he was completely healthy. The question remained, what could have motivated a young man to attack two girls who had done nothing to him? Peter was charged with 2 counts of murder of Nicola and attempted murder of Sinead, after which he was jailed pending the hearing. Detectives gathered all possible information to find a motive. Nicola was buried in County Kerry, near the place of her birth, which her mother always associated with the happiest moments of her life. Meanwhile, the doctors managed to pull Sinead back from the brink, but her face was covered with scars from the attack. The road to her physical and mental recovery would be long. On October 31, 2002, a hearing was scheduled for the case of murder and attempted murder. The victim's family expected it to be a straightforward hearing, with the killer separated from others and the families placed in different areas of the courtroom, as is typical. However, the case drew such a large crowd that the courtroom was completely packed, with no free seats left, and some people were forced to stand. Families of both the victims and the accused sat shoulder to shoulder, creating a chaotic atmosphere. The trial commenced and was expected to be short since Peter Whelan had confessed. It was clear that he showed no remorse, even making cruel jokes about Nicola and Sinead during the hearing. A major inconvenience for Nicola's family was the judge's decision to forbid them from reading their statements to the killer, denying them the opportunity to express their thoughts about the criminal. During a break, the seats of the victim's family were taken by the relatives of the defendant, and they had to move as there was no room for Nicola's brother. When the killer was brought into the courtroom in handcuffs, his father stood up and patted his son on the shoulder in a show of support, which appeared shockingly cynical to the families of Nicola and Sinead. Ultimately, Peter Whelan was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attacking Sinead, in addition to the life sentence for Nicola's murder. In his sentencing, the judge emphasized that this crime was one of the most brutal in the history of Ireland. What was particularly shocking was the complete absence of a motive. Peter claimed he acted out of uncontrollable anger for perceived slights and decided to punish two innocent girls who had done nothing to him. Just a month after starting his prison sentence, the case continued to draw national attention. Peter filed an appeal, but all his appeals were ultimately rejected. Throughout his imprisonment, he filed 9 appeals and even tried to reach the Supreme Court. Each of these events was accompanied by hearings, to which the family of Nicola and Sinead were forced to attend. Peter seemed determined to force them to relive the circumstances of the attack again and again. They could not ignore these court summons because they did not want to give this monster even the slightest chance to achieve a mitigated sentence. Against the backdrop of Peter's impudent behavior, numerous questions arose about the legal system. Under Irish law, the appeal fee and the provision of a lawyer from the state are paid for by taxpayers. Hundreds of thousands of euros were spent on this. In fact, the victims of the attacker were paying for him to get a chance at freedom to continue his crimes. Naturally, many people thought this was unfair, especially the families of Nicola and Sinead, who felt the imperfections of justice. Peter's defenders managed to achieve a change in the order of serving his sentences, meaning that he first had to serve 15 years for the attempted murder before the life sentence would begin. To the surprise of the Sweeney and O'Leary families, after 17 years of imprisonment, the criminal was eligible for temporary release. He was repeatedly taken from prison to Cork, where he spent his time quite legally. Moreover, the correctional system did not even warn the families of the victims that the most dangerous criminal was at large next to them. It became known that Sinead was never able to fully rehabilitate herself after the attack. Even after 10 years, she still had an overwhelming fear of the dark and suffered from nightmares. To cope, she got a German Shepherd, which helped her feel at least a little calmer. The families of the victims repeatedly contacted the Irish correctional system, trying to get at least some comments about Peter, but all requests were ignored. It was believed that the temporary release was completely legal according to the parole board. Peter had almost completely served his 15-year sentence, although in fact, he completed only 11 years for attempted murder and received parole as a model prisoner, beginning his life sentence only 6 years later. Peter was first released in 2018 on compassionate grounds due to the death of his mother, Mary. He was granted temporary release to say goodbye to her. However, it seemed that the law enforcement system showed no compassion for the parents of Nicola or her friend, who miraculously survived the massacre. Subsequent temporary releases were based on recommendations from the parole board as part of the rehabilitation program for criminals of the Supreme Court, which is not mandated by law. These recommendations continue to cause controversy in Ireland. There are often cases when prisoners serving long sentences are given opportunities for release, but this happens extremely rarely in the early stages of life sentences. According to the Commission's comments, each case of temporary release is considered individually. In Peter's case, he was deemed a model prisoner. He initially spent 2 years in Cork prison, after which he was transferred to a maximum security correctional facility for 13 years. In 2018, he was transferred again, this time to a prison called Wheatfield, which is considered to have a less severe regime. However, in 2019, the government confirmed that Rochestown murderer Peter Whelan would remain in custody until at least 2025 under the new Pardons Act. Under the Act, prisoners sentenced to life will be eligible to apply for parole after serving 12 years of their life sentence. This does not mean, of course, that they will be eligible for parole at that point. The department also confirmed that the Act will apply to both new and retroactive sentences. The new 12-year eligibility threshold will apply to prisoners sentenced to life regardless of whether the sentence was imposed before or after the Act came into force. The announcement was welcomed by the families of Whelan's victims. The Sweeney and O'Leary families are now calling on the minister to act quickly, so it can take effect before Whelan's next parole hearing, currently scheduled for November 2020. When Sinead first learned that the killer had the right to temporary release and was periodically walking the streets of her hometown, she immediately declared that this monster would definitely kill again and therefore should not be released into society, even for a short time. She also stated that if he was released, she would be forced to leave her hometown because she simply wouldn't be able to feel safe. Now, they are trying to ensure that Peter remains behind bars and is unable to return to his hometown, where the families of Sinead and Nicola live. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Janet Loretta Tillman. Even the most pious image can conceal a dangerous person. Clever manipulators can deceive entire communities, gather loyal followers, and carry out sinister deeds behind their backs. The population of Vincent, Alabama, USA, is about 2,000 people, and here you can still encounter neighbors who are not afraid to leave their doors open or their keys in their cars. Timothy Dane Tillman worked at the local Renaissance Center and was considered the best preacher in town. Many looked up to him as a mentor and source of support. Nevertheless, the man's story turned out to be full of mysteries. Until 2000, Timothy traveled across the states, preaching the gospel. He managed to embark on an extensive pilgrimage from Florida to Minnesota. People responded positively to his words and felt supported by him. The pastor's wife, Janet Tillman, was a very modest woman and a caring mother who embodied the image of a priest's wife. She was always there, trying to support her husband throughout their marriage, during which they welcomed 2 daughters, the eldest, Jessica, and the youngest, Fanny, who seemed to withstand any obstacles and problems. The pastor never forgot that the foundation of his work was charitable activity, demonstrating this through actions rather than words. For example, when Hurricane Katrina hit Louisiana, he saw an opportunity to support the community that was struggling to recover from the disaster. In September 2005, he proposed a fundraising event called the Hunt for Turkey, which was essentially an outdoor shooting range. The proceeds were meant to help those in need. Everything was organized as best as possible, but on October 22, 2005, after the 3rd shot, one of the rifles jammed. The pastor, along with his wife, was concerned because the situation seemed quite dangerous. One of the church members offered to fix the gun, but Timothy declined, worried about the safety of the many children and strangers present in the church. He decided to put the gun in the trunk of his car, where it remained for 4 days. On October 26, Janet took the faulty weapon, while her husband took 2 other rifles, intending to store them under their bed. Janet went first, with Timothy following her. Suddenly, a shot rang out from the pastor's house. According to Timothy's confession, when he entered the room, the rifle hit the door frame and accidentally discharged. A bullet struck Janet, who was a couple of meters away from him. She was seriously injured and began to bleed in her husband's arms. As help arrived, she repeatedly told him that she loved him and their daughters. When the police and ambulance finally arrived, it was already too late to save Janet. The pastor was overwhelmed with grief, crying almost constantly and covering his face with his hands. The most devastating news for him was that his wife did not survive. At that point, few understood what had happened, and the police were preparing to take Timothy to the station for questioning and to record an official statement. He wandered around the church courtyard, blaming himself for inadvertently killing his beloved wife. Everyone knew him as a good person, incapable of any cruelty, and they wanted to support him, convinced that it had been an accident. When Timothy was at the station, he was able to give a full account of the incident to the police. He described what had happened in detail, explaining about the jammed rifle and that Janet had wanted to protect those present by putting it under their bed. He also mentioned that she had taken the 2 remaining weapons to the room, where one of the rifles accidentally discharged upon hitting the door frame. The police found him to be credible. He seemed like a decent person, a worthy member of society, and a pastor. It was hard to believe he had any malicious intent. Consequently, there was no reason to detain him, and Timothy was allowed to return home to his children. When Janet's sister learned this tragic news, she was shocked and decided to call her brother to share her feelings. The first assumption he voiced was that this was not an accident. They discussed everything and approached the police with their suspicions. After collecting all necessary data, the investigators decided to look into Timothy. To their surprise, it turned out that the church minister held 2 driver's licenses. One was issued in his name, and the other was in the name of Timothy Patrick McNally. Interestingly, the second license was issued just 4 months before the tragedy, raising suspicions and indicating that the pastor had something to hide. He reverted to his official name just a few days prior to the incident. During this time, the victim's family had been discussing secrets that had troubled her in the past, which now began to be confirmed in unexpected ways. From the very beginning, Janet's relatives were convinced that her death was not an accident, and they had good reasons for their suspicions. In fact, Timothy's relationship with Janet's family had always been strained. They considered him a liar and a manipulator, believing that he had deliberately turned Janet against them to the point where their connection was nearly severed. Despite these difficult relations, they felt obliged to say a proper goodbye to Janet and sought justice. Tension arose the moment the relatives of the deceased appeared on the threshold of the house where Janet had died. They didn't even shake hands with Timothy, as everyone thought he was the culprit. Janet noticed that the pastor was avoiding eye contact, and Timothy did not offer any words of greeting or apology but immediately began to express how much he loved Janet, insisted that he would never harm her, as if he were justifying himself. After several days of intermittent communication and observing all the oddities, Janet's relatives were convinced that she was a victim of deliberate murder. They even sent an email to the district attorney asking them to investigate, insisting that this crime was not an accident and believing that Timothy Tillman was the killer. After not receiving the expected response, Janet's sister, Joan, contacted the Alabama Bureau of Investigation. Subsequently, an FBI agent was sent to meet with the sheriff from the city police department. He was shown a recording of the police talking to Timothy. In this video, the agent did not notice anything suspicious. According to him, Timothy was acting scared and very confused, but this fear could have been caused by the death of his wife. Suspicions began to strengthen when the FBI agent learned about 2 driver's licenses belonging to Timothy from before the accident. From that moment, the agent decided to investigate the pastor's past in the hope of confirming or refuting the fears surrounding him. Curiously, the minister of the church had a far from holy past. From the outset, it became evident that he had a weakness for women, resulting in periodic infidelities. He liked to visit strip clubs, which was known to his wife, who initially felt outraged but eventually resigned herself to his behavior, choosing not to divorce for the sake of their children. Timothy married Janet in December 1983, their first daughter was born in 1986, and their second in 1991. The Tillman family lived in Jacksonville, Florida, where Timothy worked as a pastor. It was discovered that in 1986, Timothy was seen leaving a strip club, behavior that parishioners deemed unworthy for a preacher. Following their complaint, he was fired from the church. His sinful lifestyle could not be atoned for by the eloquence he possessed, forcing him to seek new employment. However, he became a pastor again, though not for long, as he was soon caught in an inappropriate relationship with one of the parishioners and was fired again. To avoid traveling around the country in search of a new position, he took a job in a prison. During this period, Timothy liked to call himself a policeman. In reality, he worked as a civilian, sitting at the entrance, registering those coming and going. One day, he encountered a call girl. Later, she claimed that he had abused her near her home. This incident was investigated, and the former pastor was subsequently charged and sentenced to 10 months in prison in Minnesota. The abuse accusation seemed too much even for the all-forgiving Janet. During this time, Janet decided she had had enough. Exhausted by his regular betrayals, she and her children chose to start anew. She contacted her relatives, who helped her relocate to Alabama, where she found a job in the same office as her sister. This reunion allowed her to learn just how sinful Timothy truly was, which ultimately ruined their relationship. Janet began working in the office and contemplated a career, finding it much better than continuing a relationship with a husband unable to control his animalistic urges. For several months, the sisters lived together. Janet even started to recover and forget about her problematic husband. Then, unexpectedly, Timothy called. He stated that he was being released from prison early for good behavior and wanted to surprise his family. He asked for forgiveness and swore he had reformed, constantly insisting that he loved his children and that Janet could not deprive their daughters of their father. Despite her deep disappointment and feelings of betrayal, Janet allowed her husband to return to the family. Close friends warned Janet that this was a bad idea, but she did not heed their cautions and began to distance herself from her family once again. The Tillman family reunited, and in 2000, Timothy vowed to leave his past behind. They began to attend the Assembly of God, where he befriended the pastor and gradually began to speak in the church. Over time, this eloquent speaker opened doors to other religious organizations. Thus, Timothy first appeared at a revival event in Vincent, Alabama, where his wife hoped everything would be different, wanting to avoid another move. In January 2003, when they visited the center, there was no pastor present. It seemed like an incredibly fortunate coincidence. Timothy volunteered to conduct the service and performed so well that they decided to hire him without conducting any additional checks or interviews. He was seen as a very talented and eloquent preacher. Gradually, the unholy father managed to become the senior pastor of the church while concealing his legal issues. He behaved with restraint around women and did not visit questionable establishments. Indeed, before hiring someone for such a position, they meticulously checked for any convictions related to abuse, and his previous dismissals from several churches could have posed a significant problem. Nevertheless, Timothy succeeded in hiding these incidents, typically using standard excuses like losing or forgetting his documents. It was astounding, but it seemed to have worked. A skilled manipulator could have talked excessively. In Timothy's biography, there was still nothing to cling to. Concrete evidence was needed to start building a case for premeditated murder. Eventually, the police became interested in the case and actively got involved in the investigation. Timothy was not informed about all this. He continued to lead an ordinary life, believing that he had fooled everyone once again, while the investigation suspicions grew. Meanwhile, he took advantage of the support of the local community in every possible way. The locals rallied around him and his children. They supported their beloved pastor and even provided him with financial assistance. A few weeks passed. Suddenly, Timothy announced that he needed to leave his daughters with family friends for a while and attend a pastor's conference in Washington state. The event was expected to take a significant amount of time. It seemed strange that a man would decide to undertake such a long trip during this difficult period. The pastor's phone calls needed to be checked. During the trip, one number contacted Timothy more frequently than others. The contact was investigated and turned out to belong to a woman named Molly Bizzari. Considering that the pastor was traveling on a business visit, it seemed odd that he maintained constant communication with a woman, including evening conversations clearly outside of working hours since the death of his wife. It had been several months since he returned from his visit to Washington and attempted to start anew with his children. Unexpectedly, Jessica called her grandmother and reported that she had a fight with her father after discovering suspicious messages on his social media accounts. Judging by these messages, her father seemed to have been involved with Molly during his trip to Washington. The daughter was shocked to learn that he had forgotten her mother so quickly and found a new romantic interest. As a result, rumors began to spread that the pastor had a mistress for a long time, possibly even during his wife's life. In any case, now the pastor could have a motive for committing murder. Perhaps his relationship with this new woman had become serious, and he decided to marry her. Divorce is always long, difficult, and expensive. If he was indeed grieving for his deceased wife, who had died in an accident, he would not have so quickly pursued a new woman. Thus, the first confirmation of suspicions was found. Now it was necessary to determine when his acquaintance with Molly had begun. The police began to examine Timothy's emails and discovered that they had first contacted several years ago. It was an anonymous communication that he could maintain unnoticed. Interestingly, he had been trying to win Molly's favor for a long time. During this period, Janet worked a lot and did not suspect her husband, or perhaps she simply did not want to confront any potential infidelities. Meanwhile, the communication continued, and Timothy became more immersed in their long-distance relationship, clearly wanting to advance it to a new level. Gradually, he learned that Molly's father was a military man. At this point, he decided to create a fake identity and reveal it to his interlocutor. He posed as a naval officer. As it turned out, he even visited a military goods and paraphernalia store where he assembled a Navy lieutenant's uniform to impress his mistress. Now, before the detectives stood a man leading a double life, one with a wife he had buried and another with a woman on the side. The investigators were convinced that all of this was more than mere coincidence. The trip to Washington raised many questions. It was apparent that Tim had used a driver's license under a different name, which confused not only his mistress. The preparation seemed too serious. Until now, it was unclear why he would kill his wife if it was possible to simply get a divorce. Soon, the detectives had an answer. Perhaps a divorce could undermine his reputation in his new community, and he feared revealing the darker aspects of his personality. Additionally, it later came to light that he received a payout from Janet's life insurance after her death, which could also have served as an additional motive for murder. The detectives decided to meet and speak with other church employees. In addition, the police informed the public about the man's history of violations, including charges related to abuse. Many were shocked to learn that the pastor was capable of such atrocities and how insidious the liar was. However, there were supporters who viewed the accusations as a conspiracy against the holy man. Damage to the pastor's reputation was done. Detectives sought tension so that the suspect would begin to make rash decisions and mistakes. Many townspeople began to believe that Timothy had deliberately killed Janet. The whole scenario, which was being portrayed as an accident, seemed strange. The decision to take the weapon from the event to his home, specifically to his bedroom, did not seem justified. And now it seemed clear why the armed forces had acted this way. Rumors began to spread. Church members stopped feeling the same reverence after the preacher's speeches as they had before. On the contrary, uncertainty grew, and suspicions about him increased. Timothy stopped being trusted, and some openly expressed dissatisfaction with his behavior. Apparently, the tension led the pastor to turn to the church leadership after some time and express his desire to leave his post for another location. Despite everything, there were supporters within the community who provided him with financial aid and assistance with his move. The pastor claimed that he intended to take his daughters and return to Florida to be closer to his family. For the detectives, this looked like a disaster. The police officers from the armed forces did not yet have the necessary evidence to press charges and arrest the suspect. They were forced to simply watch as Timothy left Alabama. At some point, the detectives began to fear that he would escape justice, but investigators did not abandon the case and continued working to achieve justice for Janet. The situation changed rapidly after Timothy's departure. His sister called the police and reported a curious phone conversation that had taken place just minutes earlier. While she was at work, the phone rang with someone inquiring about Janet, identifying themselves as a representative of a credit institution. They stated that Janet had taken out a large sum of money on January 6, 2006, which was very curious since Janet had already died by that time. It was about $5,000, indicating that Timothy had used his wife's name and reputation to commit financial fraud. There were suspicions he could be involved in more such episodes. However, the most valuable implication was that it provided an opportunity to arrest him for fraud. This, of course, gave detectives a good opportunity to question Timothy about his wife's death. The suspect was not naive, so it was necessary to act carefully. The investigators knew the suspect well. They carefully analyzed his personality and behavioral characteristics. Therefore, they aimed to provoke a loss of self-control, which would allow them to secure a confession at the right moment. Although the chances were slim, this might have been their only chance. The detectives traveled to Florida for what would be one of the most challenging interrogations of their careers. It began as an ordinary conversation, and under pressure from the evidence, Timothy confessed to the fraud. He claimed he had financial difficulties after the death of his wife and the loss of his job, stating that he needed money for his move. Naturally, this was not the only thing the detectives wanted to discuss, so they smoothly changed the topic to the accidental shot that had occurred in his marital bedroom. Unexpectedly, his story began to shift. Initially, Timothy had stated that he accidentally discharged the weapon against the door frame. However, now he claimed that the rifle had slipped from his hands. He then added that he had accidentally tripped over the threshold when entering the room. All these inconsistencies provided the detectives with opportunities to exploit this change in narrative, particularly concerning the switch of the surname from Tillman to McNally shortly before his wife's death. Timothy had an excuse. He claimed that his brother was involved with Janet and that he did not want to be part of the Tillman family. Eventually, he decided it was foolish and changed his surname back. Of course, this strange story was not believed, and the obvious lies only strengthened suspicion against him. However, a confession or some material evidence was necessary. The officers spoke with Molly. She willingly agreed to cooperate with the investigation, stating that the trip to Washington was made for an engagement proposal, supposedly in August 2005, before his wife's death. According to her, Timothy had initially introduced himself as a divorced pastor, and that's how their relationship began. All this time, she believed he was free, but it turned out they were only separated by distance. He had surrounded Molly with lies about his military service, even claiming he was conducting secret missions on behalf of the U.S. government. He then recounted a tragic story about his ex-wife's death, presenting a different version of the accidental shooting. Previously, he had not mentioned anything like that. According to him, Janet had supposedly moved the rifles when the shot accidentally went off. In subsequent letters, Timothy referred to Molly as a kindred spirit and expressed his eagerness for their reunion, stating that she would become a mother figure for his daughters. In support of her words, Molly provided access to the correspondence she had with Timothy. Her entire story was confirmed, that the main suspect had become engaged to a woman he had found while his wife was still alive. This only confirmed the suspicions against him. Timothy Tillman was again interrogated and immediately began to lose his composure. He shouted that he had not killed his wife, even though 6 months had passed since her death. But even then, the authorities still did not have enough evidence. The case was just being built, so Timothy was arrested for financial fraud. The man was extradited back to Alabama. Janet's family expected justice, but unexpectedly, Timothy was released from jail. It was too early to panic. This was a deliberate move. Timothy remained under suspicion, and the detectives wanted the killer to believe his story was being accepted. The list of charges against him was limited to forgery of documents, and for the next 5 months, Timothy lived in Florida with his daughters, hoping that all the bad was behind him. Finally, a case against the pastor was built, and they decided to charge him with the murder of Janet. He was arrested without warning. According to detectives, at that moment, his knees almost buckled from surprise. The big problem was the presence of only circumstantial evidence. Therefore, there was a high probability that the criminal would escape punishment altogether. However, the prosecution took this risk and sought a confession, which Timothy refused, opting not to accept a deal with the prosecutor's office. It was also unclear how the shot from the rifle was provoked. The prosecution had only one rule to prove guilt: the constant changes in testimony during interrogations and other lies. On the prosecution's side, there was a witness named Jimmy Abbott, the man who had brought the rifles to the shooting event. He had personally repaired and inspected the weapons before giving them to Timothy, ensuring everything was in good order and unloaded. They had only managed to shoot from one rifle, which jammed. Thus, to conduct an accidental shot with any other weapon, it would have been necessary to deliberately load it. Moreover, the pastor's decision to postpone the event because one gun jammed seemed strange, as it was possible to simply continue shooting with other rifles at the shooting range. Timothy's choice to take the rifles into his bedroom generally baffled everyone. A few days before the tragedy, Timothy wrote a letter to Molly's father, convincing him of his serious intentions. According to Timothy, he would soon solve all his problems, and they would get married. The prosecution believed that under certain circumstances, the defendant would kill again without hesitation. Timothy himself refused to testify in court. Despite using his classic method of presenting himself as a pious man, the jury saw through his lies. For many, his demeanor changed dramatically. The man who had been a spiritual leader for an entire community turned out to be a cold-blooded killer who did not even look at his children as he left the courtroom. Timothy Dane Tillman was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment in October 2009. Following this, there were numerous petitions, and even a retrial took place, but his guilt in the murder was once again confirmed. Timothy was also sentenced to 10 years in prison for forgery of documents and fraud. The killer remains behind bars and will probably never be released. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Nahir Galarza. Fernando Pastorizo, born in 1997 in Entre Rios, Argentina, is the son of Silvia Mantegazza and Gustavo Pastorizo. Despite his parents' divorce, he grew up in a loving and supportive environment, as both his mother and father maintained a strong relationship to care for him and his sister, Carla. Fernando was a joyful and kind individual who connected easily with others. He had many friends and was always willing to help those in need. Dependable, loyal, and considerate, he earned respect as a model of integrity. Nahir Galarza, born in 1998, is the daughter of Marcela Larza, a senior police officer, and a former officer. She grew up in a family where power and authority were prioritized, which afforded her the freedom to act as she pleased. Her mother paid little attention to her daughter's interests and sometimes encouraged inappropriate behavior. In contrast, her father consistently maintained complete control over her. From a young age, Nahir became accustomed to exploiting and manipulating others to achieve her goals at any cost. At school, she was one of the most popular girls, beautiful, confident, yet often cruel to those she deemed inferior. Despite their stark differences, Fernando and Nahir entered into a relationship that ultimately ended in tragedy. They began dating as teenagers, and at first, their bond seemed like a typical youthful romance. However, the relationship quickly took a darker turn. Fernando loved Nahir with all his heart and would do anything for her. However, Nahir betrayed him, inviting other men into her home and taking advantage of his feelings, making him emotionally dependent. Despite being hurt and humiliated, Fernando endured, hoping that she would change. The more Fernando realized the toxicity of his relationship with Nahir, the more she tried to keep him by her side. Nahir controlled Fernando's phone, monitored who he was communicating with, and accused him of cheating, even though she herself continued to date other people. When he started to distance himself, she grew angry, made threats, and used her father's position as a police officer to intimidate him. On December 25, 2017, Fernando attended a nightclub with his friends. While there, he saw Nahir kissing another man. The incident occurred in front of everyone, publicly humiliating him further. Unable to ignore the betrayal, Fernando confronted her, demanding an explanation. Instead of responding calmly, Nahir lashed out at him. Her friend, Sol Martinez, even joined in, striking Fernando in the face. Nahir laughed, insulted him, and mocked him in front of the crowd. Humiliated and devastated, Fernando left the club, unaware that it would be the last night of his life. Emotionally shattered, Fernando confided in his friends about the pain he was enduring. What hurt him most wasn't just Nahir's betrayal but her cruel insults about his family, whom he dearly loved. That night, he made a decisive choice. He would end their toxic relationship once and for all. Determined to start fresh, he enrolled in a university in a different city, hoping to escape the manipulation and suffering Nahir had caused. Although cautious due to her unpredictable nature, Fernando was resolute in his plan to move on. However, Nahir refused to let go. The desire to control took over her. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him. In her mind, if Fernando couldn't belong to her, he wouldn't belong to anyone. On December 28, 2017, after days of constant arguments, Fernando finally agreed to meet Nahir one last time. She begged him, promising that she wanted only to spend one final night together before they parted ways. Unbeknownst to Fernando, this decision would prove catastrophic. For Nahir, the meeting wasn't about saying goodbye, it was a verdict. At Nahir's house, everything seemed normal. They spent several hours together and reportedly even tried to reconnect. Fernando might have hoped that they could part amicably, but in Nahir's mind, if she couldn't have him, no one could. If he left, he would be gone forever. On the morning of December 29, 2017, Fernando was preparing to leave, feeling as though he had finally freed himself from the chains that had bound him for so long. She asks him to take her to her grandmother's house. Fernando refused initially, but he eventually agreed to take her for one last ride. He got on his motorcycle, and Nahir climbed on behind him. In her pocket was a weapon that belonged to her father. Between them, an uneasy, unspoken tension lingered. Fernando and his future killer were now heading down the same road. When they reached a deserted stretch of road, Nahir tapped Fernando on the shoulder and told him to stop. Trusting her, Fernando pulled over, expecting an explanation. Instead, she pulled out the weapon and attacked him in the back. The bullet pierced through him, and he collapsed to the ground, injured and dazed. Struggling to comprehend what had just happened, Fernando attempted to move, but Nahir didn't give him a chance. She stepped closer, aimed her weapon, and attacked again from point-blank range. Fernando died there on the side of the road. After the murder, Nahir remained calm. She attempted to eliminate evidence by searching for the bullet casings. While she was trying to find a shell casing, the second casing had already rolled onto the grass, a mistake that later became key evidence against her. During this time, a passing taxi driver noticed a girl leaning over someone lying on the ground. However, he didn't stop, thinking it was insignificant. While his decision not to intervene might have changed the course of events, the truth eventually surfaced. Soon, the name Nahir Galarza became infamous as she earned the grim title of being the youngest woman in Argentine history to receive a life sentence. Nahir's behavior immediately after the crime was chillingly composed. After cold-bloodedly attacking Fernando, she acted as though nothing had happened. At 5:22 a.m., security cameras captured her walking home, calm and seemingly unaffected, showing no signs of fear, distress, or remorse. Once home, she put the weapon away, took a shower, and went to bed, displaying no alarm or guilt. By morning, December 29, 2017, the city of Gualeguay woke up to shocking news. Fernando was found dead next to his motorcycle, having been attacked twice in what was evidently a calculated and callous murder. Initially, the police suspected a robbery, but the details didn't add up. Fernando's wallet, phone, and money remained untouched, and his motorcycle stood upright, with no evidence indicating a struggle or fall. There were no signs of resistance or a physical altercation. This wasn't an accident or random violence, it was calculated, personal, cold-blooded murder. As news of Fernando's death spread through the city, one name was on everyone's lips: Nahir Galarza. Witness accounts painted a dark picture of their relationship. Fernando's friends claimed she humiliated, controlled, and threatened him. The police now had their first lead. Nahir was brought in for questioning. Around the same time, it was reported that a farewell message had appeared on her social media account, stating that Fernando, the love of her life, would be missed. However, her demeanor during interrogation shocked investigators. She appeared cold, indifferent, and unapologetic, speaking about Fernando's death as if it were trivial. She denied being in a serious relationship with him, but the investigators unearthed countless messages, photos, and witness testimonies proving otherwise. Under mounting pressure, Nahir attempted to protect herself by taking drastic measures. Initially, she denied all involvement, but when presented with undeniable evidence, she admitted to attacking Fernando. She claimed it was an act of self-defense, a narrative that contradicted both the physical evidence and the crime scene. The investigation revealed the shots were intentional and methodical, not spontaneous. Additionally, Fernando had shown no signs of aggression or attack against her. Perhaps the most damning evidence of all was her behavior after the murder. Nahir neither called the police nor sought help. Instead, she calmly returned home, making no effort to report the incident. This aspect of her response proved to be her greatest mistake. A passing taxi driver later testified, saying he saw a girl crouched over Fernando's body, seemingly searching for shell casings. This testimony confirmed Nahir's attempt to conceal evidence. She was no victim, she was a killer. Despite her youth, Nahir revealed herself to be cold-blooded and calculating. She believed she could lie, manipulate, and evade justice, but the truth ultimately caught up with her. Nahir faced a trial that not only changed her life but devastated Fernando's family, who had lost their beloved son. That night, not only did a young man lose his life, but the ideals of justice and love were shattered. Yet the lingering question remains, was justice truly served, or did Nahir manage to avoid full accountability? CCTV footage captured Nahir walking home calmly at 5:22 a.m., showing no signs of panic or tears. Additionally, they discovered a shell casing that she had overlooked. A friend of Fernando revealed years of his suffering, describing Nahir's manipulative behavior, cruelty, and relentless jealousy. Police determined that this was not an act of self-defense but a premeditated, cold-blooded murder. Nahir's father, a high-ranking police officer, enlisted the country's top lawyers to lead her defense. Their strategy aimed to shift the narrative, portraying Nahir not as a murderer but as a victim. The defense claimed that Fernando had abused Nahir and that she acted in desperate self-defense. They presented photos of bruises, allegedly caused by hockey training, as evidence of supposed violence. The trial became a spectacle, raising the critical question, who was the victim and who was the aggressor? Nahir tearfully recounted how Fernando had allegedly tortured her, forced her onto a motorcycle that night, attacked her, and that she acted in self-defense. She painted herself as a frightened girl pushed to her limits, but her story began to unravel. Fernando's friends testified about her possessive and controlling behavior, how she created dramatic scenes, knocked him down, and obsessively tracked his every move. Fernando himself had confided to others that he feared her and wanted to escape their toxic relationship. A psychologist, called as a defense witness, made a shocking statement during the trial. Nahir is not a victim but a manipulator and narcissist accustomed to getting her way. This declaration entirely undermined her defense. Even feminist organizations, which had initially rallied in her support and portrayed her as a victim of domestic violence, were unable to sway the court's decision. The evidence was overwhelming. The judges rejected the self-defense claim and instead concluded that her actions were deliberate and calculated. Nahir was sentenced to life imprisonment, becoming the youngest woman in Argentina's history to receive such a sentence. But does this verdict bring Fernando back? Does it ease his family's grief? No, but it delivers justice. After this case, domestic violence gained wider social attention in Argentina. However, it also raised difficult questions. Can one partner be the consistent source of toxicity? Why do so many relationships end in tragedy? And how many individuals like Nahir remain unaccountable for their actions? This case shattered societal stereotypes and forced Argentine society to confront harsh realities. Most disturbingly, it served as a grim reminder that love, in its most toxic form, can have fatal consequences. Despite Nahir's attempts to manipulate the narrative, the truth of her crime could not be concealed. On July 20, 2018, a tense silence filled the courtroom in Gualeguay as the judge delivered the verdict. For Fernando Pastorizzo's family, the decision brought only partial solace. They had endured months of profound grief, compounded by public scrutiny, a drawn-out trial, and attempts to paint their son as the aggressor. While justice prevailed, no verdict would ever bring Fernando back. In the courtroom, Fernando's parents expressed gratitude to the lawyers and everyone who fought to expose the truth, vowing to keep their son's memory alive. The trial of Mahir deeply divided society. The case dominated national media, with her face constantly on television and in newspapers. Public opinion was polarized. Some saw her as an innocent victim unfairly vilified, while others regarded her as a cold-blooded murderer. Regardless of the ongoing debates, the evidence was undisputed. Fernando's family not only lost their beloved son but were also stripped of the chance to witness the future he could have had. Every piece of evidence, every photograph shown in court, was a painful reminder of their irreplaceable loss. Nahir's father, Marcelo Galarza, an influential police officer, lost everything: reputation, career, family. Everything collapsed after his daughter's conviction. In a desperate attempt to escape punishment, Nahir even accused her father of the murder, but the court dismissed this claim as yet another act of manipulation. The trial exposed not only the brutal reality of the crime but also the devastating effects of toxic relationships, abuses of power, and unchecked privilege. The case serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of violence in relationships: manipulation, control, psychological abuse, and sometimes even fatal outcomes. It raises important questions. How do privilege and connections influence justice? Are there sufficient safeguards to protect individuals trapped in toxic relationships? Why is domestic violence not only a women's issue but also one that affects men? Fernando Pastoriza was more than just a victim. He was a young man with dreams, aspirations, and a future that was cruelly stolen from him. His tragic story is a call to action, a poignant reminder of the importance of justice and the urgent need for change. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jessica Stasinowski and Valerie Parashunti. Stacey Mitchell was born in Dorset, England, into a loving and close-knit family. She had an older brother and two younger sisters. At the age of 10, her family relocated from the UK to Australia. Stacey was a cheerful and friendly girl. Her father lovingly referred to her as the soul of the house because of her ability to connect with everyone. She never held grudges and always looked for ways to help her family or learn something new. She enjoyed meeting new people, was very sociable, and had a kind heart. As a teenager, Stacey became friends with two older girls she met through a mutual friend. Jessica Stasinowski was 19, and Valerie Parashunti was 21. Stacey was drawn to them because they were different from her other friends. Valerie, in particular, was fascinated by the vampire subculture and claimed to have been drinking blood since the age of 10, starting with her own and later that of others. As Stacey grew older, she began to argue more frequently with her parents. She became less interested in playing with her younger sisters and, after disagreements with her parents, would spend long periods upset, isolating herself in her room and feeling misunderstood. On December 7, 2006, Stacey turned 16 and decided to run away from home. It is common for police officers to reassure parents in such situations by saying that their children are growing up and need time with their friends, that they will return home eventually, and that there is no need to panic or take drastic actions. Stacey's parents loved her deeply and were worried, but they decided not to respond harshly. To preserve their relationship with their daughter, they chose to wait and let her stay at a friend's house for a while before involving the authorities. However, after 6 days, they reported her missing to the police on December 13, 2006. When Stacey ran away, her goal was simply to escape her home environment and let things calm down after a recent family argument. However, she wasn't sure where to go, as most of her friends still lived with their parents, and staying with them for days without raising questions wasn't feasible. That's when she thought of her new adult friends, Jessica and Valerie. Both women were older than Stacey and lived in a rented house in the suburbs with a man named David Ross John Haynes. The house was spacious and had an empty bedroom. When Stacey arrived, they offered her the spare room for just $20 per week. Stacey was thrilled because this arrangement seemed to solve her immediate problem. She moved into the empty bedroom on December 14th. She appreciated the newfound freedom, no rules, no arguments, and no one monitoring her actions. Her friends, Jessica and Valerie, who were older, could also help her get alcohol if she wanted. To Stacy, this setup seemed ideal. However, officially, she was still reported missing, and her family was desperately searching for her. Despite any past disagreements, her parents deeply loved her, cared about her well-being, and wanted what was best for her. After several days of searching, Stacy's family was able to contact her on December 17th, 10 days after she had run away. During a phone conversation, Stacy revealed where she was staying. Hoping to repair their relationship without causing further tension, her parents decided not to force her to return home immediately. Instead, they wanted to rebuild trust and avoid pressuring or frightening her. Stacy promised them she would come home the following day. The plan was for her to spend one final night with her friends and then return home. Her parents even arranged to meet her at the train station. The next day, Stacy's parents arrived at the station, eager to reunite with their daughter. However, Stacy was nowhere to be found. They wondered if she had changed her mind, lost trust in them, or simply decided not to return. They waited for a while, hoping she might just be running late, but eventually, they had to return home without her, overwhelmed with worry and confusion about what could have happened. When Stacy failed to show up, her parents reported the matter to the police, providing the address she had given along with the names of the people she had mentioned. It was then officially reported that Stacy had gone missing again. Just a few days later, Stacy's parents' worst fears came true. On December 21st, Stacy's remains were discovered, confirming the tragic outcome. While some reports stated that only a severed leg had been found, others claimed her entire body was recovered. In reality, her corpse was found inside a large plastic wheelie bin behind the house. The tragedy hit even harder when Stacy's family and friends learned the horrific details surrounding her murder. It was revealed that Stacy's new friends, Jessica and Valerie, became irritated with her shortly after she arrived at their house. Stacy's cheerful demeanor, her expectation that they, as older friends, should support her, and her carefree behavior quickly wore on them. Tensions escalated as Jessica and Valerie began arguing, blaming each other for allowing Stacy to stay. They were frustrated by Stacy's habits, such as walking around in her underwear, freely entering rooms, and constantly engaging them in conversation. Their irritation deepened when another roommate, David, told Jessica and Valerie that Stacy had been making unkind remarks about his friends and criticizing their behavior. This led Valerie to conclude that Stacy was interfering with their freedom to live as they pleased. Rather than simply asking her to leave, Valerie decided that the only solution was to permanently get rid of Stacy. Jessica and Valerie began discussing their plans to kill Stacy and revealed their intentions to David. Although hesitant, David did not openly oppose their idea. He later recounted that on December 17th, he saw Jessica grinding glass in a stone bowl in the laundry room. When he asked what she was doing, Jessica openly admitted that she planned to mix the glass into Stacy's food. David pointed out that Stacy's death would be extremely painful and drawn out, as the glass could severely damage her esophagus and intestines, causing her immense suffering and loud screams that might alarm the neighbors. To carry out their plan, Stacy would need to be restrained while the glass was fed to her. They asked David to assist, but he refused. Instead, they offered him the option of simply observing. Meanwhile, Stacy had already informed her parents during a phone call that she planned to meet them on December 18th to return home. She even told David, Jessica, and Valerie about her plans, but they appeared intent on proceeding with their scheme regardless. David said he felt relieved that Stacy would soon be leaving but did nothing to dissuade Jessica and Valerie. On December 18th, Stacy missed her scheduled meeting with her parents. That evening, Stacy, Valerie, Jessica, and David went to a nearby bridge, where they entertained themselves by throwing bottles at passing cars on the highway and running away whenever they disrupted traffic. Late that night, the four returned to the house and sat at the kitchen table, drinking whiskey. Stacy complained about having a headache, so Jessica gave her a pill, claiming it was a painkiller. However, the pill was actually a sleeping aid for insomniacs. Earlier that morning, Valerie had warned David to lock himself in his bedroom and play loud music when the time came to carry out the murder, as he refused to participate. After Stacy took the pill, David noticed Valerie holding a concrete block between her legs. She then turned on music and began dancing. David retreated to his bedroom, leaving Stacy, Valerie, and Jessica in the kitchen drinking whiskey, and he played loud music to drown out the noise. Stacy tried to get up and dance with Valerie and Jessica, but Valerie told her to sit down. Soon after, David heard Jessica yell, "Right now, right now." This was followed by a loud, dull thud and Stacy's screams. Valerie had struck Stacy on the head with the concrete block. Terrified, David stayed in his room, while Jessica briefly came to check on him and found him panicking. David stated that he experienced a severe panic attack. Valerie struck Stacy multiple times with the concrete block before calling for Jessica. Jessica moved back and forth between David's room and Valerie, watching her actions from the doorway. To cover up Stacy's screams, Jessica adjusted the music in David's room, lowering the volume at times to talk to him and increasing it at other times to drown out the horrifying sounds of what was happening. Stacy screamed for help, but David remained indifferent to her pleas. At one point, Stacy crawled to the door of his bedroom, desperately clinging to it. In response, David forcefully slammed the door shut. He then told Jessica that he couldn't bear to witness what was happening and wanted to leave. To help him avoid the scene, Jessica blindfolded him with a black t-shirt and guided him past Stacy and out of the house. She instructed David to keep walking until everything was over and promised to call him later. Despite knowing that a murder was taking place inside, David chose to flee rather than intervene. Meanwhile, Valerie continued attacking Stacy with a concrete block until it broke, but she didn't stop. Eventually, Jessica joined in. She removed her belt, which had a chain attached, and used it to strangle Stacy. Though Stacy struggled fiercely, pulling at the chain and gasping for air, Jessica tightened her grip until Stacy lost consciousness. After succeeding in their plan, Valerie and Jessica celebrated, squealing with delight, hugging each other, and returning to the table to finish the leftover whiskey as part of their gruesome victory. 20 minutes later, Jessica checked Stacy's pulse and found that she was still alive. The kitchen was covered in blood, spattered on the floor and walls, so Valerie grabbed sponges and a mop to start cleaning. 30 minutes later, Jessica checked Stacy's pulse again and discovered she had died. At around 1:30 a.m., David called to ask if everything was done. Jessica confirmed Stacy was dead but explained they needed more time to clean the house and told him to keep walking for a few more hours. David spent the next 2 hours wandering around the neighborhood. While waiting for David to return, Jessica and Valerie continued cleaning the scene. Shockingly, they had filmed the murder, capturing moments of drinking, cleaning, and even mocking Stacy. They laughed, mimicked her accent, and Jessica could be seen laughing and dancing while Stacy's lifeless body lay on the floor. At 3:20 a.m., Jessica called David to let him know the house was still slightly messy but that he could return. Blindfolded once again, David was led into the room. By then, Valerie and Jessica had removed Stacy's body, hidden it in a dumpster behind the house, and started planning how to dispose of it permanently. The next morning, David and the others went to a local hardware store to buy a chainsaw and several shovels. 3 days later, on December 21st, the police showed up at their house shortly after midnight. Jessica managed to escape by running out the door, while Valerie stayed inside and gave the authorities a false name. Valerie and David claimed that Stacy had left and no one knew her whereabouts. 3 hours later, after the police identified Valerie's real name, they returned to the house. This time, only David was present. He confessed that Stacy had been killed by Valerie and Jessica and revealed the location of her body, stuffed inside a plastic container on wheels behind the house. Following their arrests, Valerie was placed in a cell with another inmate, Rochelle Van Roos. Rochelle engaged Valerie in conversation on various topics and later reported that Valerie described the murder without displaying any remorse. Instead, Valerie seemed proud of her actions, claiming that she and Jessica enjoyed themselves immensely while killing Stacy. According to Valerie, they drank and celebrated afterward, thrilled to be rid of Stacy, whom they found annoying and difficult to deal with. Later, Valerie admitted to Rochelle that Stacy had irritated them, blaming her entirely for what had happened. Valerie even disclosed that she and Jessica struck Stacy approximately 180 times during the attack. Valerie added that she regretted how quickly it all ended, wishing she'd had more time to prolong the cruel acts they inflicted on Stacy. In 2007, Jessica wrote about the murder and revealed that when Stacy was killed, she experienced an overwhelming thirst for blood, unlike anything she had felt before. She described how something within her shifted at that moment. When Stacy's blood splashed onto her, it was as if her vision became clouded, and she couldn't stop herself. Based on letters and stories from prison, it became evident that neither Jessica nor Valerie felt any remorse or shame for their actions or the impact on Stacy's family. The pain and shock of Stacy's loved ones meant nothing to them. Throughout the trial, Jessica and Valerie even laughed and mocked the situation, expressing their disdain for the whole thing. Valerie's defense attorney described her as suffering from a severe personality disorder and having endured a traumatic upbringing, including an abusive father who had served prison time for assaulting her mother. By the age of 10, Valerie had developed an obsession with the vampire subculture and a morbid fascination with drinking human blood. In March 2008, Valerie, Jessica, and David all pleaded guilty to their crime. David was sentenced to 2 years in prison, while Jessica and Valerie received life sentences in maximum security prisons, with a minimum of 24 years before becoming eligible for parole. Valerie appealed her sentence, but her appeal was unanimously rejected. The judge expressed shock at their behavior during the trial, saying that they had had over a year in custody to reflect on the horrors of their crime, yet they showed no remorse and failed to appreciate the sanctity of human life. The judge also remarked that they seemed to enjoy violence. After the trial, Valerie, Jessica, and David were sent to separate prisons. Initially, they attempted to stay connected by exchanging letters through a fellow inmate, Catherine Burney, but their communication gradually dwindled. In 2009, Valerie was involved in a prison fight, injuring 3 officers who tried to intervene. In 2013, she made an unsuccessful attempt to escape, failing even to leave the premises. Jessica, meanwhile, had 20 minor offenses cleared in 2014 after authorities deemed them insignificant compared to the severity of the crime that led to her imprisonment. The cleared charges included 18 counts of riding public transportation without a ticket, 1 count of drinking in a vehicle, and 1 count of smoking in a prohibited area, offenses that the court categorized as trivial. Stacy's family continues to mourn her tragic loss, grappling with a profound sense of guilt for not being able to protect her. Years after Stacy's passing, her father shared with journalists the enduring pain of losing his daughter. He said that they thought about it every day and wondered if something could have been done differently. He expressed sorrow, saying that Stacy could have had a child by then, and he often imagined what that child might have looked like. He added that it was heartbreaking knowing they would never see her again. Stacy's older brother, who was just 2 years her senior, eventually moved back to Britain following her death. He explained that staying in the place where his sister's life ended was unbearable, calling her death utterly senseless. He reflected on the deep pain of realizing that Stacy had been close to returning to her family, only to now confront the devastating reality that she was gone forever. The haunting story of 2 individuals who took pleasure in ending a young girl's life remains difficult to comprehend. After a quarrel with her parents, Stacy sought solace in her older friends, who offered no support but instead dismissed her, saying she irritated them. One of these individuals, David, was described as timid and prone to panic attacks. At the time of the murder, he allegedly wandered aimlessly around the neighborhood instead of intervening to stop the crime. He had the opportunity, plenty of time, to call the police, a single act that might have saved Stacy's life. Many feel that David's punishment does not adequately reflect his role in the tragedy. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Erica and Benjamin Sifrit. Erica Elaine Grace was born in 1978 in Pennsylvania to Charlotte Gale and Gerald Mitchell Grace. As their only daughter, she enjoyed a comfortable and carefree childhood, thanks to her father's wealth from owning a construction company. Erica was intelligent, excelled in high school, and had a passion for basketball. She graduated in 1996 and attended the University of Mary Washington, where she became a basketball star and graduated with honors. However, teachers noted that she lacked confidence in her abilities and was often influenced by others. In 1998, she met Benjamin Adam Sifrit, who exploited her vulnerabilities. At first, it seemed like they were in love and got along well because they shared many common interests, especially in the field of sports. Benjamin, who was born in Esterville, Iowa, was an excellent swimmer and worked as a lifeguard. After graduating from college, he joined the Navy to train in the Navy SEAL Special Units, where he achieved great success. Benjamin and Erica make a great couple, with health and fitness being top priorities in their lives. Benjamin had a large tattoo on his chest adorned with symbols that only he understood. While this might have amused other women, Erica accepted it as a part of his identity. However, it is important to note that Benjamin was manipulative and had a negative personality, using intimidation and arrogance to get what he wanted. After a few weeks of dating, Benjamin proposed to Erica. To the shock of her family and friends, she said yes. This was surprising because Erica had never been impulsive or irresponsible. Accepting a marriage proposal so quickly was out of character for her. However, this time, passion overtook her decision. In 1998, Erica and Benjamin married privately without inviting anyone, not even their parents. Their honeymoon was brief, and soon after, Benjamin's career began to falter. In 2000, Benjamin faced court-martial for various offenses, including poor performance, absence without leave, wearing unauthorized insignia, and insubordination. According to the naval prosecutor, Benjamin had developed a complete disregard for authority. His military lawyer, the captain, noted that he had initially shown promise and received good evaluations, but that something had changed recently. He had lost interest in his service and career, often neglected his duties. Ultimately, Benjamin was discharged in disgrace due to his misconduct. In early 2001, 23-year-old Benjamin and Erica moved to Pennsylvania, close to Erica's hometown. This was the first time Erica's parents met Benjamin, and they were not pleased with him. They opened a scrapbook store named Memory Trail, where they primarily created photo albums for their clients. They then started selling some products online, including items they had stolen from stores and restaurants. Erica felt pressured to meet her husband's expectations and tried to demonstrate her capability by completing tasks that he assigned. However, to cope with her stress, she started drinking excessively and using banned substances. Meanwhile, Benjamin was searching for excitement in his life and sought out unusual experiences. He even bought snakes to keep as pets, causing concern among friends who noticed his strange behavior changes. On the weekend of May 25, 2002, Erica and Benjamin decided to go on a trip together. They went to a nightclub in Ocean City, Maryland, and rented a penthouse in a nearby apartment complex. At the same time, Martha Margene Jenny Crutchley, an insurance agent, and her banker boyfriend, Joshua Edward Ford, were also heading to the same nightclub. Martha and Joshua had been together for about a year and enjoyed spending weekends without a specific plan, simply wanting to eat, drink, and enjoy the night at the Ocean City Club. Erica and Benjamin unexpectedly met Martha and Joshua. They spent several hours together dancing, laughing, and singing. Just before the club closed, they invited Martha and Joshua to their rented penthouse for more drinks and fun. Martha and Joshua joyfully accepted the invitation, unaware that it would be their last night together. When Martha and Joshua failed to show up for work the following week, their colleagues grew concerned and called the police. On May 31st, early in the morning, an alarm went off at the Ocean City chain restaurant due to a theft. The police rushed to the scene to investigate. As they arrived, they saw a man and a woman leaving the restaurant with heavy bags. Upon detaining them, the officers discovered that the thieves were Benjamin and Erica. In addition to the stolen items, weapons were also found in Erica's bag. During a lengthy interrogation, Erica struggled to remain calm, crying and claiming she was experiencing a panic attack and needed her medication from her purse. When a police officer checked her bags, he found something unexpected: ID cards belonging to Joshua and Martha. They refused to explain how they obtained the documents. Meanwhile, a police patrol visited the penthouse rented by Erica and Benjamin. Upon searching the apartment, they found no signs of Joshua and Martha, except for photographs taken during their time together. As the police investigated the house, they became increasingly convinced that a crime had occurred there. Their search revealed several puzzling clues. They discovered blood spatter in both the master bedroom and the bathroom. Additionally, they learned that Erica and Benjamin had purchased paint and plaster, likely to conceal a bullet hole in the bathroom wall. Several bullet casings found on a table matched a weapon owned by Erica, and one of the casings had blood on it. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Joshua. During the interrogation, Benjamin chose to remain silent and requested a lawyer. In contrast, Erica began recounting the night's incident, asserting that her husband was the actual killer. She explained that after a night out at a nightclub, Joshua and Martha came to their apartment to continue the evening. At some point, Erica suspected that they had stolen her bag, leading Benjamin to attack them. According to Erica, Joshua was attacked first in the head, followed by Martha, who fled in fear to the bathroom and tried to hide under a small table. Benjamin then killed her as she was curled up in a ball. Erica claimed that Benjamin was responsible for the murders, while she only assisted him in disposing of the bodies. In her confession, she said the bodies were put in trash bags and dumped in a dumpster on the outskirts of Ocean City. The police searched local landfills and found only one of Martha's legs and Joshua's torso and arms. The rest of the bodies were never located, which meant the official cause of death could not be determined. The bullet was fired from a weapon, discovered with Joshua's remains, and was also found next to Erica. Both Erica and Benjamin were charged with first-degree murder for the deaths of Joshua and Martha. However, they both pleaded not guilty. The trial began on March 31, 2003, but due to the media attention, it was relocated outside of Worcester County, Maryland. Benjamin's trial was held in Rockville, and Erica's trial was held in Frederick. The public reacted negatively toward them, who had lived a seemingly luxurious life but turned out to be brutal murderers. According to court documents, Erica described her husband's obsession with power and control and his significant influence over her. However, Benjamin's lawyer contested this claim, arguing that Erica was frequently under the influence of alcohol, strong antidepressants, and diet pills, which may have affected her judgment and contributed to her actions. Benjamin listened quietly during the trial as Erica grew more distant from him. The defense attorney pointed out to the jury that the murder weapon was Erica's and presented ballistics results showing that the bullets from that weapon killed Joshua. Although the weapon was confiscated from Erica at the time of her arrest, proving that she was the one who pulled the trigger was difficult. The prosecution was represented by the Worcester prosecutor, who called a witness named Melissa Selling. She had spent the evening with Benjamin and Erica after her friend had taken her out on a date. At the trial, Melissa initially cried and seemed upset, but then she collected herself and testified. She explained that when she arrived at the date venue, Benjamin and Erica were already there. They were in a car with a flat tire, appeared drunk, and were acting strangely. Melissa recalled that Erica approached her and hugged her as if they were close friends, even though they had never met before. Benjamin had blood on his mouth, likely from biting his lip during the incident with the tire. The group soon went to the apartment they were renting. There, Melissa and her friend were shown Erica's pet snakes. Erica mentioned that she took medication for anxiety. When Erica suggested that they all relax in a hot tub and Melissa declined, Erica's mood shifted drastically. She began to scream and became angry, claiming she couldn't find her purse. Benjamin, who had been calm and kept his distance, suddenly jumped up and demanded that whoever took Erica's bag return it. He pulled a weapon from his belt, waved it angrily, and pointed to a bullet hole in the wall of the bathroom. He angrily warns them that they will suffer the same fate as a couple who previously attempted to steal Erica's bag, although the bag remains in its original location, untouched. According to Melissa, Benjamin and Erica often blamed and intimidated others. When Melissa and her friend attempted to leave in their car, Benjamin tried to take control of the vehicle. When asked in court if she believed Benjamin's claim that he had killed a couple, Melissa was uncertain. She stated that she had only thought Benjamin and Erica might be involved in the crimes but could not confirm it. The trial concluded, and after 2 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict on April 9, 2003. Benjamin Sifrit was convicted of second-degree murder for the death of Martha but was acquitted of any charges related to the murder of Joshua. This decision angered Joshua's brother, Mark, who expressed his disagreement with the verdict and wished for Benjamin to spend his life in prison. Additionally, Benjamin was found guilty of other charges related to his actions. The judge stated that the crime was committed purely for the thrill of murder. Benjamin killed without any good reason. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison for second-degree murder, along with first-degree assault, and an additional 5 years for being an accessory to another murder. Benjamin also pleaded guilty to second-degree burglary of a chain restaurant and to carrying a dangerous weapon during that break-in, which resulted in a 3-year prison sentence. Overall, his total sentence amounts to 38 years in prison. The judge noted that if it weren't for the excellent work of Benjamin's lawyers, he would have received a life sentence. However, he must adhere to the jury's decision. The judge expressed that this was one of the rare instances in his 20 years on the bench where he disagreed with the verdict. It is also indicated that Benjamin might be eligible for parole after serving half of his sentence. The prosecutor requested to be informed about any parole hearing so he could object, as he believes Benjamin should spend his life in prison. Erica's trial started 2 months later, on June 3, 2003. Her defense team argued that the weapon taken from her was registered to her husband, Benjamin, implying that he was the owner. However, this did not exclude the possibility that Erica had used the weapon herself. The district attorney claimed that Erica and Benjamin had lured Martha and Joshua to their apartment, where they took pleasure in killing for fun. Evidence showed that the bullets found in Joshua's remains were fired from the weapon that Benjamin had given to Erica. Additionally, it is likely that Erica killed Martha, as Erica had detailed knowledge of Martha's hiding place and her position before her death. Erica also collected trophies from her victims. A distinctive ring with a dragon that belonged to Joshua was found on her finger, and photographs later showed her wearing this ring around her neck while posing with her husband. Both appeared carefree, showing no remorse for their actions. Erica had also retained 4 bullet casings as mementos. In her defense, she claimed that Joshua and Martha had stolen her expensive handbag, which contained a valuable ring worth $100,000. However, Melissa testified that the handbag was never missing, it was still there. When Melissa and her friend visited Erica, they attempted to accuse her of theft using their usual tactics. The prosecutor argued that even if there was uncertainty about Erica's involvement in the murders of Joshua and Martha, it was clear she played a significant role in her husband's actions, making her equally culpable. Ultimately, the prosecution determined that Erica and Benjamin acted as a team, and the murders were the result of their combined efforts. During the trial, the defense aimed to show that Erica had been manipulated and exploited. They argued that she was merely a passive bystander and that Benjamin was solely responsible for the crimes. One of the defense lawyers accused the prosecution of twisting the truth to exaggerate Erica's culpability. In contrast, the prosecution portrayed Erica as a young woman who was easily influenced. They presented photographs taken 2 days after the murder in which Erica appeared fragile, weak, yet happy and relaxed. They explained that this was typical for someone dependent on antidepressants, alcohol, and banned substances. The defense and prosecution clashed intensely, but after lengthy arguments, Erica was charged with first-degree murder for the death of Joshua. During statements from Joshua's relatives, Erica maintained a stoic expression. It was only when her life was discussed that she broke down in tears. She attempted to apologize, stating that she deserved everything that was said to her, even the harsh words from her relatives, and added that she didn't deserve to be there asking for their forgiveness. Ultimately, Erica received a life sentence for the second-degree murder of Joshua and an additional 20 years for the murder of Martha. Following the sentencing, Benjamin filed for divorce, which was finalized in August. Both Erica and Benjamin submitted multiple appeals, all of which were denied. Benjamin became eligible for parole in 2021, but his request was turned down. His current release date is set for 2030, subject to change based on his behavior. Erica will be eligible for parole in 2024.